Chapter 1. The Face Behind the Grave Flowers. The rain had stopped an hour before, but the earth still held a memory of it. Darkened soil, the faint perfume of drenched grass, and the low hiss of water slipping through the gutters of St. Valerie churchyard. In the quiet, a woman stood alone before a marble headstone, her gloved hands clasped tightly around a cluster of lilies. She was well dressed, elegantly so, though the black veil that concealed most of her face was heavy and impenetrable. From my vantage point, leaning upon the iron railing that bordered the graveyard, I might have been forgiven for thinking she was a figure carved in stone herself. So still was her posture. But then, as a small gust teased the veil, I caught a glimpse of her face, a pale cheek, sharp as porcelain, and lips pressed into a line of restrained anguish. It was only then that I noticed Hercule Poirot beside me. I had not heard him approach, which was rare. His patent leather shoes generally announced him before his voice ever could. He, too, was watching the woman with that peculiar intensity one knew so well, the sort of gaze that was not so much looking at as looking through. "Mon ami Hastings," he murmured, adjusting the impeccable knot of his tie. "Observe, if you please, the manner in which she stands." "She is grieving," I said. "What else would one expect in a graveyard?" "Ah, but the grief, it is of the mind, not the heart. See there? She does not look down at the stone, as one who remembers the lost. Her gaze is fixed at the base, at the flowers themselves." I frowned, peering again. Indeed, her eyes were not on the name carved into marble, but on the cluster of blooms laid there. The lilies she carried were fresh, but there were other flowers already resting upon the grave, wilting white roses, tied with a ribbon that had once been a vivid crimson. Without a word, Poirot stepped forward, the click of his shoes startling the woman. She turned sharply, clutching the lilies tighter. For a moment her breath caught, as if she had been caught in some delicate, illicit act. "Pardon, madam," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "It is a beautiful gesture, to bring such flowers. But I cannot help noticing, these are not the first today." Her eyes flashed, and I thought she might refuse to answer. Then, in a voice low but carefully measured, she replied, "No, they are not for me. I came to take them away." "Ah!" Poirot's eyebrows rose, and I could almost hear the cogs turning behind his composed expression. "You would remove them? But why?" She looked from him to me, as if weighing whether she could trust us. Finally, she said, "Because the man who placed them here is not welcome, nor should his memory linger in this place." Before Poirot could question her further, the church bell rang noon, breaking the stillness. She took a step back, dipped her head, and began to walk away, the lily still in her hand. Poirot, however, made no move to stop her. He merely watched her retreat, his lips pursed in that peculiar way they did when he was storing something away for later use. "You're going to let her leave without asking her name?" I asked. "Mais non, mon ami," Poirot replied, glancing down at the flowers still lying on the grave. "She has already told me far more than she intended. The name will come. Oh, yes. For now, it is the flowers that speak." I stepped closer to see what had so caught his attention. The ribbon tying the roses was slightly frayed, and upon closer inspection, I could see faint brown stains marring the silk. They were not rust nor dirt. Poirot straightened. "Come, Hastings. We are expected at the estate of Madame Rochefort this afternoon. There will be time enough to discuss why someone leaves roses for the dead when the living tremble at their presence." And so we left, though my mind lingered on that grave, the strange woman, and the curious face I had glimpsed beneath the veil, a face that seemed less sorrowful than watchful. It was only later that day, when the shocking news reached us, that I understood why Poirot had looked at those grave flowers with such measured gravity. For the man buried beneath the headstone had not been murdered, as far as the world believed. But before the week was out, someone would be. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The Rochefort estate lay on the far edge of the village, an expanse of pale stone and shuttered windows, its gardens clipped with almost military precision. The drive was long enough to make the approach feel like a slow unveiling. Each step toward the front door seemed to draw the house's solemn facade closer in judgment. Madame Rochefort, when she greeted us, was all elegance and carefully measured charm, a tall woman in her 60s, draped in silk the shade of deep wine, her silver hair pulled into a chignon so precise it could have been set with a ruler. Yet beneath her poise, I thought I detected something else, a tautness around the eyes, as though each smile cost her a coin from a dwindling purse of composure. "Messrs," she said, her voice warm but touched with formality, "I am most grateful you could come. It is not a matter for the police, not yet, at any rate, but it has unsettled me." Poirot bowed slightly. "We are at your service, madam." She led us into the drawing room, a place that seemed more a museum than a living space. French tapestries hung beside oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and on every surface lay arrangements of fresh flowers. Yet, as my eyes moved across the room, I noticed an odd absence. There were no lilies, roses, or carnations in the usual glass vases one might expect. Instead, the arrangements were all of wildflowers, violets, heather, and small white daisies, as if plucked from a meadow rather than purchased from a florist. Poirot noticed, too. I saw the faint narrowing of his eyes. "You do not care for the cultivated blooms, madam?" Madame Rochefort's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. "I no longer keep them in the house. Since the funeral, they have an association I prefer to forget." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "The funeral of Monsieur Rochefort, your late husband?" She inclined her head, and for a moment the graceful mask wavered. "Yes, it has been nearly a year, and yet I find the sight of white roses unbearable." My thoughts turned instantly to the grave we had seen that morning, the ribboned roses lying upon it. "And yet, madam," Poirot said gently, "those roses still appear at his grave?" The flicker in her expression was unmistakable, a slight widening of the eyes, a pause in the breath. "Yes, they do. Every month, without fail. No one knows who leaves them." "No one," Poirot echoed. She hesitated. "At least, no one who admits to it. It is not a welcome gesture. My husband's death was sudden, but not entirely free of bitterness." The way she chose her words made me think of unspoken disputes, of shadows that stretched back into the marriage. Poirot, however, did not press her. Instead, he asked, "And it is this matter that prompts you to seek my counsel?" "Not precisely." She moved toward the fireplace, where a small silver box rested on the mantel. She opened it and withdrew a folded note, its paper thick and expensive, the sort one might use for personal stationery. "This arrived yesterday morning. It was slipped under the door in the early hours." Poirot accepted it with a delicate touch, unfolding it carefully. I moved closer, and the words inside were few. "Another will die before the roses fade." No signature, no date, nothing to indicate the sender save for the faintest smudge of ink at the bottom corner. Poirot studied the handwriting, small, tight, and almost painfully neat. "You have shown this to no one?" he asked. "Only to my niece, Charlotte. She insisted I call you at once. She fears it is more than an idle threat." "Your niece resides here?" "Yes. She came to stay after the funeral, and has remained since. She is in the garden now, if you wish to speak with her." Poirot slipped the note back into its envelope, tucking it into his breast pocket. "We will speak to Mademoiselle Charlotte." "Yes. But first, tell me, madam, was your husband a man who kept enemies?" She gave a brittle laugh, without mirth. "In business, certainly. In life, perhaps." It was an answer designed to give little away, yet it hinted at depths worth plumbing. Poirot, satisfied for the moment, suggested we see the gardens. Charlotte Rochefort was a striking young woman in her late 20s, with a cascade of dark hair and eyes that held the restless energy of someone used to stillness. She greeted us politely, though her glance flicked more often to Poirot than to me, as though she sensed in him an unspoken authority. "You've seen the note," she said quickly. "Then you understand why I'm concerned." "Oui, mademoiselle. But tell me, who in your opinion might write such a thing?" She hesitated, looking toward the far hedge where the ground sloped toward the village. "There's a man, Henri Valcourt. He worked for my uncle once, years ago, before there was trouble. I think he blames us for what happened to him." "And what was that?" I asked. "He was dismissed. Publicly. It ruined him. He lives in the village still, though I hear he rarely comes out in daylight." Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly, though he said nothing of the sort of man who hides himself away. And he has a fondness for white roses, perhaps? I don't know. But someone has been leaving them at my uncle's grave since his death. And every time they appear, something else happens. Something else. I pressed. An accident. A theft. A quarrel that turns ugly. It's as though the roses bring trouble. She looked away, suddenly embarrassed at the superstition in her words. Poirot, however, did not dismiss her. The association of the fleurs blanches with misfortune. It is most curious. We shall see, mademoiselle, if it is coincidence or design. As we left the garden, I caught Poirot glancing back toward the house, his gaze settling on an upstairs window where the curtain shifted almost imperceptibly. Someone, it seemed, had been watching us. Do you think the threat is serious, Poirot? I asked as we reached the drive. Mon cher Hastings, he said softly, when a warning is written with such precision, it is never idle. The question is not if it will be carried out, but upon whom it will fall. And with that, we returned to the village, the echo of the words in the note lingering in my mind like the faint perfume of roses after rain. Chapter 3. The Gathering at Rochefort House. By late afternoon the sky had cleared to a pale, diffident blue, as though the weather itself wished to withdraw any appearance of melodrama from the day's events. Poirot, however, insisted we return to the Rochefort estate at once. He had telephoned Madame Rochefort from our lodgings in the village and requested, with that courteous firmness that brooked no refusal, that all who had regular access to the house be present for a brief conversation. We must see the little theater assembled, Hastings, he said, smoothing his wax mustaches. It is when the actors share a stage that their lines betray them. We arrived to find the drawing room subtly transformed from mausoleum to salon. The lamps were lit with a warm glow, and a discreet fire had been stirred to life in the grate. Though the evening was not cold, Madame Rochefort received us with grave politeness and, a moment later, rang for tea. You asked that those in the household be assembled, she said, her hands resting lightly upon the back of a chair. They are here, or will be. They? Poirot repeated, his eyes traveling to the door. My niece Charlotte, of course, and Mr. Basil Whitcomb, my husband's solicitor. He dines with us this evening. Dr. Léon Marchand. He attends me and has long been a friend of the family. My housekeeper, Mrs. Dawes, my butler, Giroux, and my gardener, Jacques Prue. I have also sent word to Lucien Rochefort, my late husband's brother. He keeps irregular hours, but he says he will come. Her gaze flicked to a side table where lay the silver box that had contained the threatening note, now replaced in its place of dignity, as though to dare its author to reclaim it. Charlotte entered first, composed but alert, as one ready to be useful. She took a seat by the window and folded her hands, too perfectly, I thought, before unfastening the smallest clasp of her bracelet and fastening it again. A tiny, nervous semaphore. Behind her came a man of perhaps 60 with a florid face and hair thinning to exasperated wisps. Whitcomb. He announced to no one in particular, bowing slightly. Basil Whitcomb. He rolled the name as if it were a title. Madam, your obedient servant, as always. His manner held a kind of bluff joviality that struck me as deliberately deployed. Dr. Marchand arrived on Whitcomb's heels, a spare, elegant figure with a kind of lean grace that bespoke excessive tennis or a rigorous diet. His eyes were cool and intelligent. He greeted Madame with gentle civility, and Poirot with a small inclination of the head that suggested professional respect. M. Poirot, he said, I have admired your work in the journals. Poirot beamed, but modestly. The journals, docteur, they flatter. It is the facts that interest me. Mrs. Dawes, the housekeeper, seemed carved from respectable oak. She wore a dark dress and a starched apron, and her hands, folded before her, were pink from hot water and soap. Giroux, the butler, was of a type I almost distrust by reflex, so perfectly the part that one cannot imagine him otherwise. He moved with discreet authority, placing the tea things as if setting a chessboard. Jacques, the gardener, hovered at the threshold until Madame bid him enter. He was broad-shouldered, with rough, clean hands and a diffident air. His boots had been scrubbed, though one bore a thread of pale clay along the welt, as a river leaves a trace after flood. Lucien Rochefort did not appear, though a message arrived on a silver salver. He would be delayed. He begged pardon. He would come directly. Madame read it with the faintest tightening at the corners of her mouth. "Lucien," she said, with the weight of a lifetime in the two syllables. Poirot did not sit at once. He stood by the mantel, hands linked behind his back, and let the room draw a breath. "Madame, Messrs, Mesdames," he began gently. "You know that a message of a very disagreeable kind was delivered to this house. It was brief, it was anonymous, and it was precise. Such things, when they occur, are either the work of the imbecile, who seeks to frighten, or the calculating mind, who seeks to announce." His eyes traveled from face to face. "I am never content to assume the former." Whitcomb cleared his throat. "An idle hoax, surely. Village mischief. We shall get to the bottom of it without fuss." "Without fuss," echoed Giroux smoothly, though his eyes were fixed upon the flame in the grate, as if it held a private narrative. Charlotte lifted her chin. "Mr. Whitcomb, forgive me, but nothing about these roses is idle. They come, and something follows." "Superstition," said Dr. Marchand without rancor. "Correlation is not causation, my dear." "Just so," murmured Poirot. "And yet the human mind chooses patterns for a reason. Tell me, Mr. Whitcomb, how long have you been adviser to the family?" "Since before Victor's marriage," he said promptly. "Nearly 28 years. I drew his will. I amended it twice. I settled the trust of Nice, and—" His color rose a little. "Forgive the catalogue." "Not at all," Poirot said pleasantly. "And the estate stands as it stood?" "As it stands," Whitcomb said a little too quickly. "That is to say, there were certain investments Victor pursued, enterprises with a measure of volatility. I advised caution. He preferred nerve. After his death, Madame has been prudent. There have been adjustments. Nothing that need concern, the public." Madame Rochefort's gaze rested on Whitcomb with a calm that might have been loyalty or appraisal. "Mr. Whitcomb has managed matters admirably." Poirot turned to the housekeeper. "Madame Dawes, you oversee the domestic routine. In the early hours, when the note came, who among the staff was awake?" "No one, sir," Mrs. Dawes said firmly. "We keep proper hours. Giroux sets the alarms and sees the doors barred at 10:30. The morning maid enters the hall at 6. She knows better than to touch anything left on the floor, and so she fetched me. I brought it to Madame." Giroux's voice was silky. "If anyone entered, it was by a key or by a hand cleverer than I have known in 20 years of service." "The side door," Jacques put in unexpectedly, then flushed. "Pardon, Madame. I speak out of turn." "You do not," Poirot assured him. "The side door?" "The one that opens from the east corridor onto the terrace," Jacques said, twisting his cap. "The top hinge has a catch that was never right. If you push and lift, it gives a little, not enough to break the lock, but—" He paused, groping for the word. "It shrugs." Madame turned sharply to Giroux. "I told you." "It was repaired," Giroux said with a faint bow, "and will be repaired again." Poirot made a small notation in his pocketbook. "And the roses at the grave. Who tends a churchyard?" "Old Pritchard," Charlotte said. "He digs, he trims. He looks the other way at everything except dogs and bicycles." "Then we shall speak to M. Pritchard," said Poirot. "For today, I would like each of you to tell me, very simply, your recollection of the night the last roses appeared." There was a small shifting in chairs, the collective bracing for questions modest and implacable. Charlotte spoke first. She had retired early with a headache, she said, but had woken after midnight to a quarrel in the lane. Men's voices, slurred, then abruptly gone. She had gone to the window, but seen only the smear of a lantern swaying and vanishing behind the hedgerow. "It could have been nothing," she added quickly, as though ashamed of her own eagerness to be useful. Whitcomb claimed he had come late from the city and stayed in the green bedroom at the top of the house. He had slept badly, these old mattresses, my back, and heard the quarter hours toll, but no intruders. He smiled expansively, as if his sleeplessness were a civic contribution. Dr. Marchand had been called out to a confinement in the village, a milkman's wife, healthy mother, healthy child, and returned at 2:30. "The churchyard was empty," he said with clinical certainty, "and I saw no roses then." Mrs. Dawes had slept the sleep of the righteous and heard nothing. Giroux permitted himself the ghost of a smile. I sleep lightly by habit, but the house was still. As always, I walked the corridor before dawn. "And you, Jacques?" Poirot asked. The gardener shifted, unhappy. "There was a fox," he said after a moment. "I keep traps," humane, only to move them on, and something set one off. I went out with my lamp. 1:30, I think. I heard steps by the wall. Not the wall by the lane. The inner wall near the garden. When I lifted my lamp, there was no one, only shadows. And did the shadow wear shoes? Poirot asked mildly. Jacques blinked. I found a mark in the soft earth by the rosemary, near the spout where the rain falls. It was narrow. A lady's heel, perhaps, or a man who wished to tread lightly. He looked miserable, as if such speculation were an impertinence. Poirot nodded and closed his notebook. "You have all been most helpful." He let the phrase breathe. "One more thing only. The white roses. Someone here despises them, yes? And someone here has reason to love them." Madame's hand moved convulsively upon the chair back, then stilled. Dr. Marchand's expression did not change. Whitcomb found something interesting in his cuff. Charlotte's eyes had gone to the window again, where the late light made a pale mirror. Giroux poured tea that neither overflowed nor trembled. Jacques looked at his boots. The silence arranged itself into an answer that was not an answer at all. It was at this moment that Lucien Rochefort arrived. The door opened and admitted a man of 45 with the air of one who finds fault first and names it afterwards. He was handsome in the way of men who have never doubted their reflection. Dark hair, decisive mouth, eyes a shade too quick. He kissed his sister-in-law's hand with a flourish that was almost a challenge and looked around the room as if calculating what each of us would cost him. "Lucien," Madame said, "steady now. Poirot has questions." "Ah," the famous Belgian. Lucien's smile did not touch his eyes. "I have long wished to see those little gray cells at work. I trust they will tell us who enjoys schoolboy pranks." Poirot inclined his head. "They will tell us who writes promises," he said softly, "and whether he means to keep them." Lucien laughed, but the sound was brittle. He took the nearest chair and crossed one leg over the other, revealing a flash of bright scarlet, almost indecent in that sober room. Charlotte's gaze flitted to it and away. Madame's expression cooled by a degree one could have measured with a thermometer. Poirot, apparently satisfied with his cast, moved at last to sit. He took a cup from Giroux, thanked him, and let the spoon settle with a faint chime. "We will not detain you long tonight," he said. "Tomorrow I shall walk to the churchyard. I shall speak to Pritchard, and I shall look again at the side door that shrugs." He set down the cup and steepled his fingers. "But first, a little request. Until I say otherwise, no one is to enter the east corridor after dark. No one is to alter the arrangements of the flowers in this house. And no one at all, is to visit the grave." "Surely," Whitcomb protested, "you cannot forbid." "I can ask," Poirot said, and the mildness of his tone, like the soft eye of a storm, brooked no argument. "Because when one disturbs a pattern, one announces oneself. And I wish, for a very little while, to see how the pattern would have run if it were not observed." Madame Rochefort inclined her head. "It shall be as you say." We left them with their tea and their careful silences. As we stepped into the cooling evening, the first star pricked the paling sky above the yew trees. Poirot paused on the threshold and looked back, not at the people, but at the flowers, those modest constellations of meadow blooms arranged on polished tables. "It is curious, Hastings," he murmured. "In a house that refuses roses, one must ask who still smells of them." We walked down the drive, the gravel making its small, crisp music underfoot. Somewhere out on the road a bicycle bell chimed and cut off abruptly, as if a hand had clapped over it. I shivered, irrationally. The night was very still, and in that stillness I had the disquieting impression, less a thought than a pressure upon the mind, that we had taken our seats in a play already begun, and that the next scene was due before any of us wished it. Chapter 4. The churchyard and the side door. We returned to the churchyard the next morning, early enough that the dew still clung in pale beads to the iron railings. The bell had not yet rung for prime, and the place possessed that austere innocence which graveyards sometimes were at dawn, as though death, too, keeps respectful hours. Poirot paused before the marble headstone we had visited the day before and removed his hat with solemnity that was not entirely ceremonial. Then he replaced it, knelt, not without a small sigh for his knees, and inspected the bed of earth and the bouquet as if there were a chess problem, and he had all the time on earth to solve it. "The roses are changed," he murmured. "Ah, Hastings, you see, yes?" I did not at once. The same white blooms lay there, bound with the same crimson ribbon whose frayed end showed faint brown smudges. But Poirot pointed, not to the flowers themselves, but to the stems. They were yesterday cut at a slant that was rough, as by a pocket-knife. See here, the ragged fibers. These, he touched two that lay underneath, are clean, neat, the angle precise. A florist's blade. 2 hands, 2 tools, 1 intention. You think someone has added to the bouquet? I asked, or has replaced certain stems, he said softly. To what end? Perhaps to hide a message that was hidden in the first. His fingers hovered just short of the ribbon. Do not touch, Hastings. The knot speaks. The knot? I repeated blankly. It is a reef knot, but reversed, tied by one who compensates for the left hand. He looked up, his eyes amused. I, who tie my ties in mirrors, am acquainted with such little betrayals. We were not alone for long. A stooped figure appeared from behind you, pushing a barrel with careful dignity. His hat was ancient felt, and his beard a white explosion about a thin brown face. "Mornin', sir," he said, doffing the hat to Poirot, and to me in equal measure. "Pritchard, I keep the stones neat." Poirot smiled and introduced us. "We are interested in the visitor who brings flowers to Monsieur Rochefort. Have you observed him or her?" Pritchard's face closed in that rural way that is not secrecy so much as a refusal to gossip, but the appeal of Poirot's courtesy was stronger than habit. "I've seen the roses," he said. "Don't always see the hand that lays 'em. Sometimes there's a footmark. Sometimes nothing at all, like the flowers grow there themselves." "You have seen no person?" I pressed. Pritchard shifted, rubbing the back of his knuckles. "Once, at first light, fog thick as broth, I saw a figure go out through the west gate. Had a brolly up, though there weren't no rain. Short, tidy sort of person. Didn't hurry. Knew where they were bound." "A man?" "Hard to say. Coat was good. Shoes neat." He sniffed, suddenly attentive. "And there was a smell of roses," I suggested. "Roses is roses," he said. "This was something sharp, not sweet, like powder you put on gloves, or what doctors rub on. Sticks in the nose." He nodded to the bouquet. "That ribbon's new." "New," Poirot said. "Yesterday's had a nick in the edge. Moth got to the silk. That one don't." Poirot's eyes glinted. He thanked Pritchard and, with a courtesy that would have flattered a duke, asked leave to make a small examination. From his pocket, he produced a square of thin paper and pressed it gently to the ribbon. When he lifted it away, a faint smear came with it, brown, not red. He held it nearer to the light, then to his nose. Not rust, not blood. Iodine, no. Carbolic, perhaps. Something medicinal. Dr. Marchand? I ventured. "The suggestion will present itself to all," Poirot said mildly, "which is why we do not embrace it too soon." He replaced the paper and, with 2 delicate pins, secured the knot so it would not shift. There, if our visitor changes his message again, he will have to create a new knot, and the story of his fingers will begin afresh. We left Pritchard to his barrow and walked the length of the churchyard wall, along the west gate. Not the gate Pritchard had indicated, but a smaller postern. Poirot knelt and gently brushed aside a film of pale grit that clung to the stone. Underneath appeared a chalky smear, fine and bright. He touched it with the edge of his nail and smiled. "Lime," he said. "Someone has brushed against a fresh rendering, or a work where lime is used. A tennis court, a mason's bench, perhaps the bleaching of linen. We must make the small list." "You grow more certain that the visitor comes from the house," I said. "From some house," he replied. But yes, intimacy with routes, the hour, the courage to carry a bouquet across open ground. The mind turns to the near, not the far. From the church, we went to the lane, and from the lane to the east terrace of the Rockefeller house. Giroux, the butler, admitted us with his impeccable blankness. Poirot wished to see the side door, he said, and led us to the corridor that ran like a quiet artery along the house's flank. Even in daylight it held a hush. The scent of beeswax polish lingered, and the space prints on the wall, the hunting scenes that respectable houses use to teach their son ferocity, looked on with fixed good humor. Poirot went directly to the door. It was stout oak, paneled, with a modern Yale above the old iron lock. He lifted the latch, pressed, and the door did not move. Then, with a tiny adjustment, his palm up, pressure on the lower rail, and the door shrugged, just as Jacques had claimed, a hair's breadth against a jamb. Poirot's hand withdrew at once. "You see," he said, looking not at the door but at the sill. There, caught in the groove where it met stone, was a film of dark dust brightened here and there by a graphite sheen. He touched it to his cuff and made the faintest face. "Hush powder," he said. "A little pencil scrape, a little oil, the poor man's locksmith. Our intruder knows how quiet a hinge." Giroux's composure took on. If not guilt, then an attentiveness too still to be natural. "I have already requested the carpenter," he said. "Mais, oui," Poirot replied pleasantly. "Request him twice." He bent, then, to a brass escutcheon where, as if to adorn the practical, someone had engraved a posy of lilies tied with ribbon. The lilies were old work, softened by touch. Poirot examined the metal with his glass. "A tiny scratch across the bow of the ribbon," he murmured. "And here, do you carry a master key, M. Giroux?" "I do," Giroux said, producing a ring of keys as reverently as a priest. Poirot looked, not at the keys, but at the ring itself. Its plating flaked at one point into yellow brass. He lifted it and turned it. The flaked place kissed the scratch upon the escutcheon like a seal to a letter. He made a little sound that might have been satisfaction, or only good manners. "You are careful," he said, "and yet such things happen even to the careful. A ring, a scratch, a hinge that shrugs because it is much used. If you imply—" Giroux began very softly. "I imply nothing," Poirot said, softer still. "I collect." Jacques the gardener came when sent for. He looked more home outdoors than in corridors, and his hands, clean though they were, had already reacquired the faint green ghosts of crushed leaves. Poirot asked him to show us the herb border, where he had seen the mark. We went out to the terrace, where the stone still held a little of the morning's chill. The herb bed lay along the downspout, exactly as Jacques had said, a modest geometry of rosemary, thyme, and rue, embroidered with something soft and gray I did not know. "Santolina," Jacques said when he saw me glance. His voice outdoors was less diffident. "Keeps moths away." Poirot stood at the downspout, eyes narrowed, and then stepped off heel to toe across the soil without touching it. "Here," he said after a moment, and pointed with his cane. A faint crescent mark, scarcely more than a bruise in the earth, lay where a heel had pressed. Opposite it, no toe print. Only a small scuff hollow, as if the foot had left lightly. "Not a lady's heel, I think," he said. "A man's narrow shoe, worn thin at the outside edge. One who walks with the foot turned a little." He looked up, smiling at Jacques. "A man who would dislike clay on his leather. He steps on the crescent, not through the bed." Jacques flushed as if he had been complimented too warmly. "I did not see all that, monsieur." "You saw enough," Poirot said. "Tell me, what of Henri Valcourt?" Jacques' head came up. Surprise chased caution across his face. "He was before my time here," he said. "But in the village they say his shop failed after Victor dismissed him. He does small work now, sharpening, mending. He sharpens shears for me." He hesitated. "He keeps good edges." "Ah!" Poirot nodded. "A man who knows a blade, and the angle of a cut." As we turned back toward the house, a flicker of movement in an upper window drew my eye. The green bedroom, if I remembered Wickham's complaint about mattresses. A curtain stirred and was still. Poirot's gaze followed mine. He merely patted my arm. "The house is eyes," he said. "It is good to let it see." We were met in the hall by Charlotte, who looked as though she had run, though her breath was steady. "I thought you should know," she said, holding out a small object on her palm. It was a card cut from heavy cream paper, no bigger than a visiting card, with a blind stamp crest at the top, a laurel wreath around an R. Below, in the same tight, neat hand as Madame's anonymous note, were 3 words, "Mind the herbs." Where was this? Poirot asked, taking it with a gentleness that endowed it with importance. "On the table by the east corridor," she said. "It wasn't there when I went through before breakfast. I saw it just now at 11. Were you alone?" Mrs. Dawes had gone down to the still room. Giroux was with the fishmonger. A fleeting smile, bitter at herself. "The house can tell you their footsteps better than I." Poirot lifted the card to the light and turned it to examine the watermark. A faint oval appeared within the paper. Rochefort House, Valmont, the stationer's pride. His expression did not change. Only the eyes deepened a shade. "It is always agreeable," he said cheerfully, "when a writer is patriotic to his own stationery." He compared the hand to the note in his pocket and made no pronouncement. Instead, he smelled the edge of the card as a taster tests wine and handed it back to Charlotte. "Please lock this in the silver box with the other. And, mademoiselle, be kind enough to tell madame that I am now in great haste to be slow." She looked puzzled, but inclined her head and went. "Haste to be slow?" I echoed when we were alone. "It is when one is watched," Poirot said, smiling, "that one must move at the speed of a growing vine. Then those who hurry betray themselves by their impatience." He slipped his hands behind his back. "Come, Hastings. We will pay our respects at Dr. Marchand's surgery, and perhaps at M. Whitcomb's office, and perhaps, if my little gray cells are very obedient, at a small shop where edges are made as new. Valcourt's. We will ask him for the time. His time. A sharpened blade keeps a diary. Mon ami. It writes in angles and in burrs. If our roses were cut twice, somewhere there's a blade that tells the truth about the hand that held it." We stepped out into the noonlight. The day had turned crystalline, every line of hedge and lintel cut cleanly as a paper silhouette. As we reached the gate, a bicycle bell sounded again twice, quick and bright, and from the lane a figure pedaled past with an umbrella furled across the handlebars, though the sun shone untroubled. Poirot watched the back wheel vanish, and then glanced at me with affectionate irony. "There are some," he said, "who do not trust the weather, and there are others who carry umbrellas for the shadow they cast." He touched the brim of his hat. "Come, there is very little time before someone decides there is no longer any." Chapter 5. The First Interviews. Dr. Marchand's surgery stood at the corner of the square, its brass plate polished to a discreet glow and a pot of geraniums standing guard upon the sill. Inside, the air carried that faint chemical coolness I have always associated with antiseptic and good intentions. A girl in a white apron took our names, bobbed, and vanished through a door with professional silence. Moments later, Marchand himself appeared. Sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow, a stethoscope looped like a narrow serpent about his collar. Poirot, Captain Hastings. You honor my humble rooms. Pray come in." His consulting room was spare and orderly. A high desk with stacked ledgers, a glass-fronted cabinet of instruments, and a rubber plant that appeared better nourished than many I have met. On the desk lay a box like a small cake tin dusted with fine white powder. Marchand caught my glance. "Talc for gloves," he said easily. "Surgeon's habit. One clings to rituals even when one is long out of theater." Poirot smiled. "Rituals, docteur, are the rails upon which we travel. They take us to very interesting stations." He gestured delicately. "We come to trespass upon your science. Yesterday at the churchyard, a bouquet's ribbon bore stain. Carbolic, perhaps. Iodine, less likely. You, who have a nose educated by necessity, what would you say to such a scent?" Marchand considered. "Carbolic has become less common for dressings. Iodine lingers. Ether is fugitive. There are modern solutions, mentholated spirits, various proprietary tinctures. But if the odor was sharp, not sweet, I should think of phenols. Carbolic, or a derivative. A medical hand, not a florist's." "Just so," said Poirot. "And your own work last night?" You were called out. A healthy confinement, Marchand replied. A Breton family by the mill. I took the back lane home at 2:30. I went by the churchyard to save steps. I saw nothing but a fog that felt as if it had been rolled there by hand. His smile was brief. If I had met a bouquet, I should have tripped over it. Poirot's gaze wandered, not idly, to a shelf where stood a narrow tin marked Rochefort & C., Tennis Chalk, Valmont Club. Marchand followed the glance and laughed softly. Ah, the club is between courts just now. I volunteer, from time to mark lines when the groundsman is ill. It is not strictly medical, but it keeps me in favor with men who dislike waiting rooms. Thus the lime, murmured Poirot, almost himself. And you are much out of doors, doctor? You keep an umbrella even in sunshine. He had touched, with a fingertip, the handle of a furrowed umbrella propped in the corner, polished horn, the ferrule uncommonly bright. In this country, Marchand said, one trusts the weather as one trusts a rich man's memory. His tone was light, his eyes, I thought, measured. If you have done with me, M. Poirot, the day is infested with sore throats. One last question only, said Poirot. Do you keep roses? Roses. Marchand blinked, genuinely surprised. No, I rent rooms. I keep my roses on other people's walls. He inclined his head. Madame Rochefort, for instance, once grew a fine alba near the East Terrace, white as linen. A pity it was grubbed out after the funeral. She will have wildflowers now. Half the village thinks that virtue and misses the point that they cost more to keep tidy. We took our leave with courtesy on both sides. Out in the square, Poirot tilted his head, as if listening to a composition only he could hear. You are thinking of the chalk, I said. Of chalk, of talc, of umbrellas, of men who mark straight lines, he replied. Come, Hastings. We disturb the law next, M. Whitcomb's. Whitcomb's offices occupied a first-floor suite above a draper's. The stairs smelled of camphor and accountancy. A young man with hair like a new brush showed us into a room where the selfsame air of powder propriety obtained. Deed boxes labeled in a precise hand, a clock tick-tocking like an admonition, and, upon a side table, a silver-topped inkstand flanked by a thick cream paper blind stamp with the Rochefort wreath. Gentlemen, Whitcomb boomed, rising from behind his desk and shaking hands as if greeting long-lost clients. How may the law illumine this melodrama? The law illuminates by order, said Poirot smoothly. It arrays the fact upon shelves. Permit me to peer at your shelves. Metaphorically, Whitcomb said, with a jocular wag of the head, I keep my clients' confidences under lock. But if you seek generalities, I can oblige. The estate is sound. Madam is solvent. The will is straightforward. If one wished for intrigue, one would be disappointed. The will, Poirot said. It was amended twice, you told us. To whose advantage? Whitcomb's color deepened in that agreeable way of men who enjoy the color of their own discretion, to no one's detriment. A small annuity increased for the gardener. This would be before Prue, in Victor's Father's Day. A charitable bequest detailed more handsomely. A trust for Miss Charlotte clarified rather than augmented. Lawyers do tidy things, M. Poirot. They seldom enrich them. Lucien Rochefort? Asked Poirot lightly. Receives a legacy suitable to a brother, Whitcomb said, as if reciting rubric. They were not close, but they were kin. Poirot's gaze had drifted to the paper. You are generous with letter sheets, monsieur. Whitcomb chuckled. Better to have a client's crest than my own humble name. Gives people the right sort of feeling about their dealings. Besides, Madam likes her stationery to be at hand here as well as at home. And any hand may use it, Poirot observed, not as a question. In practice, yes, Whitcomb admitted, when dictation runs over, when a client requires a note. You look solemn. Sir, is this a felony in embryo? Not yet, said Poirot. Tell me of Henri Valcourt. Whitcomb's bonhomie cooled a degree. Ah, that unhappy fellow. Once clerk in Victor's warehouse, not in my office. Thank God, he was caught lubricating commissions. Victor dismissed him very publicly. Foolish. If you ask me, quiet misfortunes are easy to bear. Valcourt went to wall. A wife left. A shop failed. He does small mendings now. He lifted a palm. I have employed him on occasion to repair a letter knife I favor. One could be severe and humane. Captain Hastings. It is not illegal. Do you recall when last? Asked Poirot mildly. Whitcomb considered. A fortnight ago. I snapped the blade on a parcel of proofs. He returned it sharp enough to shave with. I tipped him more than was decent. He cried. I am not easily moved by tears. He smiled, quick and brittle. Do you smell carbolic on me, M. Poirot? Do I carry umbrellas in the sun? Am I haunted by chalk? Poirot's eyes danced. You carry a very good tailor, he said, rising. We keep you no longer. Outside, the sky had the wash clarity of a plate newly dried. A bicycle clattered past, its bell giving that same double note, bright, peremptory. The rider's coat was good and his shoes neat. He did not hurry. He turned toward the lower streets by the river. Shall we follow? I asked, seized by a chivalrous urge to be useful. We shall arrive instead where a blade keeps its diary, said Poirot. Henri Valcourt's shop was no more than a front room with its bay window half veiled by a fly-blown lace blind. A sign in a hand both careful and defeated read, edges small repairs, keys cut. The man behind the counter had the parchment skin of those who have spent years in bad air and the eyes of a dog that has learnt too many human lessons. Messieurs, he said, and his bow contained something like pride. What may I make new? Your time, if you will sell it, said Poirot kindly, setting down 2 coins. You sharpened a letter knife for M. Whitcomb. Valcourt's face flickered. I am discreet, he murmured. Indeed, discretion is an honorable poverty. I ask only for craft. You sharpen also shears, secateurs, florist knives? All that is honest, Valcourt said simply. He reached beneath the counter and brought out a short-bladed knife with a hooked end, the kind gardeners use to cut stems. He touched the edge with his thumb and nodded, 30 degrees at the angle. A florist likes a clean slant, not a tear. Many cut with a pocket blade, 20 degrees, rough. It bruises. He glanced at us, half anxious, half affronted. One can tell. And when one is cut both ways upon the same bouquet, murmured Poirot. Then the stems speak 2 names, Valcourt said, the craftsman overriding the man. One who wanted beauty, one who wanted haste. He hesitated. May I? From a drawer he drew a small jeweler's loop and held it in offering Poirot, as if to a colleague. A good blade leaves a line like silk. A poor one leaves a burr that catches light like a fish scale. You are exact, monsieur, said Poirot, and the praise brought a color to Valcourt's cheek, like the ghost of youth. Tell me, who among our small world prefers such edges? Valcourt's gaze went to the window, where the street made its thin procession. The housekeepers bring kitchen knives, he said. The butlers bring keys. The gardeners bring shears. The doctor brings nothing, his or his own. The lawyer, sometimes a letter knife. Mademoiselle Charlotte. She brought a pair of little scissors. Fancy things that spoil their own edges. I told her they were for silk, not hedges. She laughed and paid for my honesty. And umbrellas? Poirot asked gently. Valcourt blinked. I sell no umbrellas, monsieur. But you mend their tips, perhaps? Poirot's tone was idle. His eyes were not. If the ferrule is loose, Valcourt conceded. I fix them with a resin that smells, how you say, medicinal. It holds in wet. He hesitated again, then added very low, M. Marchand's. Last week, a split in the horn. I made it new. We took our leave with a courtesy equal to his own. On the pavement, I expelled a breath I had not known I was holding. If Marchand's umbrella smells of resin, and Valcourt's resin smells medicinal, then a bouquet may borrow a doctor's scent without borrowing his hand, Poirot finished. Never forget, Hastings, odors are the worst witnesses. They fall in love with the first face that smiles at them. We lunched at a modest cafe where the tablecloths were clean and the bread honest. Poirot ate little but watched much. Twice the bicycle bells sounded in the street. Twice he did not turn his head. At the coffee, he said, Now we return to the house. For the east corridor? I asked for its silence, he said. We will make a little noise. He took from his pocket a square of thin paper and the 2 delicate pins with which he had secured the ribbon at the grave. When one braces a knot, those who would untie it must try again. We will learn who cannot bear to leave a thing as it is. At Rockefeller House, the air carried a hush like that of a theater an hour before curtain. Mrs. Dawes told us Madam was resting. Charlotte had gone out. Whitcomb had returned to his office. Dr. Marchand had left word he would call after 5. Giroux was somewhere about the place, which meant everywhere. Jacques was near a boarder, for a wasp had made itself a tyrant. Poirot and I stood in the east corridor. The side door looked, as all doors do in daylight, innocent of drama. On the table where Charlotte had found the card lay nothing at all but a silver vase of Santalina. Poirot did a very odd thing. He lifted the vase and, with a minute adjustment, set it down again an inch to the left. Why that? I whispered, infected by the corridor's conspiracy. Because, he said, one must sometimes shout in a whisper. He dusted his fingers and looked, not at the door, but at the floorboards where the light from the tall window fell in separate blades. We will walk away, Hastings, and then we will listen to the house breathe. We did so. We left the corridor and went to the small sitting room that opened from it. Poirot sat, folded his hands, and closed his eyes. The clock on the mantel said 3 minutes past 4. In the long, sunny quiet we heard the ordinary life of a great house. The cluck of pipes, a range door thudding far below, a glass chiming softly against another on a tray, and then, no more than the brush of a syllable, the faintest sound of wood on wood, as if someone had been moved by a hand that wished not to be noticed. Poirot's eyes opened. "The house," he murmured, "has taken its next breath." He rose. "Come." We stepped back into the corridor. The silver vase stood where he had placed it. Almost, it had been nudged half an inch to the right. Upon the polished tabletop, nearly invisible, but there for an eye that had been taught to expect it, was a ghost of white like chalk rubbed thin. "Not chalk," Poirot said softly, lifting a forefinger to it. "Talc." He held his finger to his nose. Scentless. The glove, not the court. He smiled then, not in triumph, but as a chess player smiles when he sees the shape of an opening, and reached into his pocket for his notebook. "We begin, mon ami," he said. "At last we begin." Chapter 6. The First False Lead. By the time Dr. Marchand returned to Rockefeller House that evening, the light outside had turned the color of pale copper. From the library window, I saw him dismount his bicycle with the ease of one long accustomed to thing, leaning it neatly against the stone balustrade before entering. He carried his umbrella under one arm despite the clear sky, and I noticed, not for the first time, that the ferrule caught the light like a polished coin. Poirot, who had been writing in his notebook by the fire, did not look up when Giroux announced the doctor. "Entrez, doctor, you are most punctual." "I make it a habit," Marchand replied, setting his umbrella carefully in the stand. "You wish to see me?" Poirot gestured toward the wing chair opposite. "I wish to see everyone," he said amiably. "It is my method. But it happens, doctor, that you arrive at a moment when the pattern of our little drama shows an interesting knot." Marchand's brow lifted. "The roses again?" "Always the roses," Poirot said, "and the hands that touch them. Tell me, doctor, do you ever walk the east corridor of an evening?" Marchand looked faintly surprised. "If I dine here, I sometimes use that way to step onto the terrace for air." "Why?" Poirot leaned forward. "Because this afternoon, between 4 and 10 past, someone entered it, moved a small vase, and left a trace of talc from a glove." A silence, not long but distinct, followed. Then Marchand gave a short laugh. "Talc? My dear sir, I powdered my gloves before I came here. I often do. It keeps the leather from sticking after a long day in the surgery." "You will forgive me," Poirot said softly, "if I ask where you keep your gloves when you visit?" "In my pocket," Marchand said readily, "unless I wear them. And yes, I passed the corridor on my way to garden. The door was ajar. I closed it behind me." "Ah!" said Poirot, and his tone was unreadable. "So you closed it. Did you notice the table?" I noticed the Santolina. Charlotte keeps it well trimmed. Why? Do you suspect me of floral trespass? Poirot spread his hands. I suspect nothing. I arrange facts as one arranges cutlery. But sometimes, doctor, one piece does not belong in the place where it lies. It was at that moment Charlotte entered, her cheeks flushed from the evening air. Oh, M. Poirot, you've heard? Heard what, mademoiselle? There's been another note. She held out a folded slip of paper, her hands trembling slightly. I found it just now, in the herb border. Jacques saw it glinting under the rosemary. Poirot took it without a word. This time, the message was even shorter. Tomorrow at dusk. The same tight, controlled hand. The same Rochefort house watermark. When did you last see Jacques? Poirot asked. In the garden, Charlotte said. I called him when I saw it. He was raking leaves by the sundial. Poirot rose at once. Come, Hastings. We found Jacques where she had said, tall, earth-stained, the rake still in his hands. He confirmed Charlotte's account without embellishment. It was there under the rosemary, monsieur. Could have been there all afternoon, though I'd swear I passed that way twice and saw nothing. Would you recognize the hand? Jacques shook his head. I don't see many letters, but it's neat like a clerk's. Poirot glanced down at the soil beneath the rosemary. Hastings, your eyes, if you please. I looked. There, pressed lightly into the earth beside the plant, was the same narrow crescent of a heel we had seen before, with the faint scuff opposite where the toe should have marked. The impression was fresher, the edges still sharp. That print, Poirot said quietly, was made within the last hour. Charlotte paled. Then whoever left the note. Was here while we drank our tea, Poirot finished. The doctor, who had followed us out, gave a low whistle. If you're implying... I imply nothing, Poirot interrupted smoothly. But the coincidence, it is striking, in a sea, pa. We returned inside, the note locked in the silver box alongside its predecessor. The atmosphere in the drawing room was different now, a tension as tangible as the scent of wood smoke. Madame Rochefort sat upright in her armchair, her gaze moving from one face to another like a hostess judging the civility of her guests. Whitcomb had joined us, his bulk settled into the corner of the sofa, one leg crossed, his cufflinks glinting in the firelight. I hear there's been another of these wretched missives, he said, as though commenting on an unfavorable change in the weather. You'll forgive me, but it seems to me this is now plainly the work of someone within these walls. Plain to you, monsieur, Poirot said mildly, is not always plain to all, yet the suggestion is not without merit. Then you'll be searching rooms, I take it? Whitcomb asked. Poirot smiled faintly. Perhaps, but not yet. First, I will listen to what people say when they think they have nothing to hide. Or when they think you suspect someone else, Charlotte added, a little too quickly. The doctor turned toward her. You mean me, don't you? I didn't say that. No, but you thought it, Marchand said, his tone dry, because of the talc, which I've already explained. Poirot allowed the moment to stretch, watching the exchange with an expression almost indulgent. Then he said, Dr. Marchand is correct in one thing. The talc is not a verdict, but it is how shall we say, a whisper. And in this house, my friends, whispers matter. The evening broke up soon after. Whitcomb returned to his lodgings in the village, Marchand to his bicycle, Charlotte to her rooms. Madame Rochefort remained by the fire, her silhouette sharp against the lamplight. Do you think this is a game, M. Poirot? She asked when we were alone. Poirot looked at her for a long moment. No, madam, this is a rehearsal. The performance will be tomorrow at dusk. She gave a shiver and turned away. When we left, the moon was just rising, laying pale bars of light across the terrace. Halfway down the drive, Poirot stopped abruptly and looked back at the east wing. Hastings, he said, if you wish to leave a note under the rosemary unseen, when would you do it? In the dark, surely. Non, he said softly. In the half-light, when shadows are long and eyes are accustomed to looking elsewhere. He resumed walking. Tomorrow at dusk, mon ami. That is, when our ghost will show his face. At the gate, I glanced back once more. A figure was standing at the east corridor window, motionless, watching us go. The moonlight caught the glass, and for an instant it seemed as though the face behind was pale as a mask, framed by something dark, perhaps the outline of an umbrella. Poirot saw it too. He said nothing, but I noticed his hands had tightened, as though around the handle of some invisible weapon, not of force, but of proof. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The morning of the promised dusk arrived with a washed, deceptive innocence. A breeze threaded the yews, setting their tips quivering like nerves. At breakfast, Poirot was almost gay, never a trustworthy sign. He ate half a roll, admired the jam as though it had confided something, and announced that we should present ourselves at Rochefort House for a little charity. Charity? I repeated. But certainly, Hastings. Even murderers approve of charity. It puts the conscience at a distance, like spectacles. He patted my arm. We will ask for help with a small, benevolent task, and, while hands work, the minds will betray their habits. Madame received us in the east morning room, where light fell slantwise across polished tables. On one of them lay a shallow wicker basket and a neat stack of cream cards, the Rochefort wreath blind stamped at the top. Beside these rested reels of crimson ribbon, a pair of small scissors, and a pot of sealing wax. "You are miraculous, madam," Poirot said. I confess the idea was mine. The Church Fete Committee requires favor cards for tonight's charity concert. Little billets to tie about the offerings for collection. It is nothing, a trifle, but one learns so much from trifles. "I see," said Madame, not without appreciation for the artifice. "I will oblige. And the household, too. If it is not an imposition," Poirot murmured. 10 minutes from each, no more. It was arranged easily, with that feather-touch authority Madame could still command. Giroux was summoned first. Charlotte came willingly. Mrs. Dawes with brisk curiosity. Jacques awkward but willing. Wickham with expansive benevolence. Dr. Marchand later, between calls. Lucien last of all at a saunter. The task was innocent. Address a card for the poor box. Tie a length of ribbon about it with a firm knot, and trim the ends. Poirot, having contrived it, never looked more idle. He admired the view, complimented the Santillina, asked after the carpenter with an air of devout hope, and, when necessary, leaned in to steady a reel that wished to escape. Only his eyes, quick as gnats in sunlight, betrayed that not one movement was wasted upon beauty. Giroux went first. He wrote in a slanted, elegant hand learned from ledgers, tied the ribbon with neat economy, and, without a pause of the untrained I would note, compensated with the left hand to form a wreath not true for a mirror. Poirot's gaze rested on the tiny twist, and moved on like a cat's ear flicking at a fly. Giroux trimmed the ends with the little scissors. Tested once, snipped twice, set them down with a faint click precisely parallel to the table's edge. "Vous, it's exact," Poirot said softly. "I am paid to be," Giroux replied without pride. Charlotte wrote in a lively, looping script that gave itself away with charming carelessness, an extra flourish on pour, over an eye like a stray star. She tied a bow instead of a knot, laughed at herself, undid it, and tried again, this time a reef knot, correct but too tight, as though she wished to make safe what the world left loose. The ribbon puckered. "Oh, bother," she said, cheeks flushed, and reached the scissors, tiny silver things engraved with ivy. The blades chattered on the silk. The cut was ragged. "Mademoiselle," Poirot murmured, "these are for silk, not hedges." She flashed him a rueful grin, recognizing the echo of Valcourt's complaint. Mrs. Dawes's writing was square and upright, her knot decisive. Her cut clean with a kitchen shears she insisted upon fetching, because toy scissors are an insult to honest ribbon. The ends lay crisply, obedient. "There," she said, "that will not come loose in a draft." Wickham, smiling, made a little speech about the virtues of community, and then spoiled it by worrying at the knot as though testing a witness for perjury. His wreath knot reversed itself timidly into a granny. He frowned, undid it, and this time succeeded. Left over right, right over left, but with the awkwardness of a man reciting a prayer he never quite learned. He trimmed the ends of the office paper knife he carried everywhere, discovering, too late, that it inclined to bruise rather than slice. "Ha!" he said, affecting good humor. "I have done violence to your ribbon, madam." Better ribbon than people, Charlotte said, a shade too lightly. Jacques wrote for the poor box in laborious capitals, tongue to one side in concentration. His knot was competent. His cut, with his own small pruning knife produced shyly from a pocket, was at a gardener's 30-degree slant, clean, precise. He halted, flush rising. "Pardon, madam, I should have asked." "On the contrary," Poirot said, sincerely pleased. "A man with the right tool honors the work." Dr. Marchand wrote swiftly, a doctor's confident economy. From habit, he dusted his fingers from the talc jar he had in his coat pocket, then arrested the movement with a small, self-ironic smile, and set the jar down. His knot was elegant, sailor's neatness, and reversed quite naturally by a left-hand compensation he did not appear to notice. He reached the trim and paused. "These toy scissors are a crime," he said, and took from his pocket a little leather case with instruments, scalpel among them. He did not use a scalpel. He chose a tiny curved blade and, with a deft flick, made an edge like silk. Lucien arrived last, bringing the weather with him as if it were a valet. He took the card with 2 fingers, wrote his line with a flourish that was not unlike a signature, and tied the ribbon carelessly, making a bow as one ties a parcel for a mistress to enjoy undoing. "Not," he said when Charlotte chided. "Life is not enough." He undid his bow with a little tug that seemed an argument and tossed the ribbon to the table. "Madam, if you want money for your poor box, I will give it. If you want ribbon exercises, forgive me." "Lucien," Madam said, the one word at all the authority of a lifetime. He gave a small, mocking bow and was still. "Tres bien," murmured Poirot, as if contented with the spectacle of domestic life. He thanked them, praised them, and made a tiny stack of the cards, his fingertips lingering for an instant upon the ones whose knots reversed. When the room was empty save for us, he rearranged the pile with the delicate seriousness of a man sorting relics. "You see Hastings? The hands. They confess what the lips are too modest to say. Giroux and Marchand, not as left-handers, compensate. Wickham struggles like a man who practices virtue in emergencies. Jacques cuts like a florist. Charlotte cuts with affection and impatience. Lucien refuses the knot altogether. Is left-handedness a verdict? I asked, "Jamais," a whisper only, but we collect whispers until they sing in chorus. He took one card, Wickham's, I thought, and set it aside. Another, Giroux's, beside it. From his pocketbook, he drew a third, thin and folded. The first anonymous message. He did not compare hands like a policeman. He compared habits, spacing, the impatience of a tale, the virtue in a stroke. He smiled, not at an answer, but at a question that had consented to stand still long enough to be asked. "Now," he said, "we will make our own whisper." He wrote on a Roquefort card, in his small exact script, "The knot tells a hand." He tied about it a narrow ribbon in a reversed reef, compensated left, and laid it upon the table in the east corridor where the Santalina breathed its moth-bitter perfume. "Isn't that rather, I began, indelicate? Perhaps. But our friend believes himself subtle. He will not imagine that I lay bait for the vanity and not the guilt." We left the card and, like thieves with scruples, withdrew to the little sitting room again to listen to the house. The minutes ticked with the stately indecency of an old clock. Somewhere a door closed. Footsteps crossed stone. A match struck. A glass clicked upon another. Then very softly, the faintest silkerish brush. Ribbon on wood. Poirot's eyes met mine. He held up a hand. "Wait." And then, with a dancer's noiselessness remarkable in so punctilious a man, he moved to the threshold and looked. A figure stood at the table, back to us, neat, compact, head bent, gloved hands, pale kidskin, worked at the knot, not to untie it, to retie it. The movement was practiced, unhurried, left hand compensating, right hand presiding, and when it was finished, the ribbon lay perfectly, not a pucker to be seen. The gloved forefinger smoothed the crease. The card was turned a fraction so that the wreath sat precisely square to the edge of the table. The vase of Santalina shifted half an inch to center. Poirot did the oddest thing. He coughed delicately, as if embarrassed to intrude upon private devotion. The figure straightened, composed already. Giroux turned, his face as tranquil as a sideboard. "Monsieur," he said, and if his breath had quickened, it condescended not to show it. "The ribbon was ill-tied. It offends me to leave such a thing in an important place." Poirot inclined his head. "Forgive me. I am clumsy." "It is nothing," Giroux replied, and would have passed. Poirot, with the tenderness one uses for a porcelain cup, let him. When he had gone, I exhaled. "Giroux." "Sure," said Poirot. "What have we seen? Not guilt. Habit. A man whose office is to correct the world by half-inches. That is suspicious behavior, if you ask me. It is also the reason the tea does not spill." He glanced at the table. "We have learned one thing. Our whisper reached the ear it was meant to tempt." He replaced the bait with a second card. "The paper tells a house." He left it untied, bare but for the wreath, and we went to find the others where conversation could be held without a ribbon's complicity. We found Charlotte in the library, the light at her shoulder turning the fine hairs on her cheek to a pale halo. She was reading, not the page before her, but some inward script. "You were watching," she said without looking up. "Always," said Poirot pleasantly. "Tell me, mademoiselle, if one wished to write a note that was not to be traced, where would one take paper?" "From a place where everyone takes it." She said it once. "From the solicitor's office, for instance. Mr. Wickham insists his clients use Roquefort paper for everything within those rooms. It is, what did he call it? Good for the feeling." A small smile, sharp at the edge. "He leaves the sheets about like hymnals." "You do not like Mr. Wickham," I said. "I like him very well for a man who never leaves a room without telling it he did." She closed the book. "I do not think he is wicked. I think he enjoys the idea of being indispensable, which is a different vice." "And Dr. Marchand?" Poirot asked, as if it were nothing. "Admirable," she said promptly, and then flushed. "That is, he is kind. To grandmamma. To everyone. Too kind, perhaps. It can be." She groped for a word, and chose a brave one. "Complicit." "Complicit with what?" "With whatever requires kindness," she said simply. "Oh, I am unjust. He brings babies and drives coughs away. But he smooths too much, as if he could talc the world." "You think of talc." Poirot observed mildly. "You told us of it," she countered, and at once looked stricken, as though she had revealed more than she meant. "Forgive me. I am talking to fill the air. Dusk is soon." "Dusk," Poirot said, "is when the eyes see what they always saw and the mind admits it." We left her, and, in the corridor, almost collided with Wickham, who came bustling with a sheaf of documents to place before Madame for initial. He saw the card on the table, smiled, and tapped it with a forefinger. "Exactly so," he said. "The paper tells the house. Leave anything lying about here, and it acquires a pedigree." "And a temptation," said Poirot. Wickham's joviality tilted. "Temptations are for the poor, M. Poirot. The rich have tastes." He bowed himself away, leaving behind a draft of cologne that had taken a friendlier interest in him than I could. By mid-afternoon, the house had taken on that preternatural hush particular to places that await a verdict. Poirot walked once through the east corridor, paused at the door that shrugged, and placed his palm flat upon the wood. "Do you hear at Hastings?" "I hear nothing." "Precisely. A hinge, silent from artifice, wishes to be used. Tonight it will be." He turned, and in his eyes there was that light I have seen on storms an hour before they break. "We have enough," he said softly. "But the mind that writes in ribbon and paper believes itself an author. It longs to complete its sentence." He looked toward the windows, where the day had begun to tilt. "We shall let it." Chapter 8. Dusk and the Second Crime. Dusk drew its veil with the exactitude of a stagehand. Between one tick of the long case clock and the next, the light thinned to lavender. Edges softened. The house seemed to inhale. I have seen Poirot at such moments many times. Alert, almost playful, and yet with an intentness that made me think of a cat listening beneath a floorboard. He had made no elaborate arrangement of watchers and cries. No, that would have flattered the culprit's sense of drama. Instead, he placed us as one might place paperweights to learn where the drafts lived. "Jacques," he said, You will go on with your work by the herb bed as though nothing in the world exists but your Santalina. Hastings, stroll with him and talk of hedges. I shall be in the east corridor a little way off, where I can admire the door that shrugs without frightening it into immobility. Giroux, where is Giroux? Here, monsieur, said the butler from the threshold, noiseless as a sigh. You will do as always, Poirot said pleasantly. The thing that gives us all courage. Routine. Madame rests. Charlotte reads. Mrs. Dawes scolds the copper pans. Mr. Wickham, has it returned? I am expected at past, Wickham said, appearing with a punctuality that seemed to me defensive. There are papers for Madame's initial. And Dr. Marchand? Poirot asked into the air, and the air obliged. Marchand stepped from the library, gloves in one hand, his umbrella in the other. I will call again later, he said. There is a fever I must attend across the river. I leave by the terrace. It is quicker. Good, Poirot said, and smiled in that benign, baffling way. Everyone's habits are the pillars of my little bridge. We went out by the east door and took our places in the fading light. Jacques, big as a tree, knelt at the rosemary with his trowel and made those small, tactful noises that persuade a plant to forgive one's hands. I walked a little up and down and tried to look like a man who thought of nothing but trenching. From the lane there came the bright, two-note chime of a bicycle bell. From the village the first Angelus. From the terrace behind us, the steady hush of a house teaching itself not to creak. See there, Jacques murmured without looking up. At the spout, a movement, no more than persuasion of shadow, slipped along the wall and vanished. I took a step, then stopped as Poirot had drilled me to do. It is a curious experience to stand still when every human desire cries run. It makes one feel both coward and conspirator. Inside, a door feather closed. Poirot appeared in the corridor an instant later and lifted a hand the size of a thought. Wait. Then, with a delicacy that would not have embarrassed a lace-maker, he pressed his palm to the east door and... Ah! It yielded that fraction we had learned to hear as speech. He did not go through. He stepped aside and let the silence complete its sentence. A breath, no more, of the scent we'd been circling all day drifted into the corridor. Not roses, not wildflowers. Something clean and astringent that recalled dressing rooms and new bladed edges. Talc without perfume. Resin with the shyness of alcohol. We heard, faintly, the squeak of metal against metal. A lid lifted. A pause. Then a small, smothered sound that I knew at once. Paper settling on paper. The silver box, I whispered. Poirot's eyes shone. He did not move until the minute hand in the little sitting room had taken 3 clear steps. Then he went forward with that light-footed gravity of his and pushed the door wide. The east corridor lay as before, the small table, the modest vase, the card with the Rochefort wreath. Only the air had altered, as if it knew something. At the far end, the passage bent toward the library. We followed it and came upon Charlotte in the reading chair by the window, a book open but unread in her lap, eyes fixed on the middle distance with the expression of someone listening for her own name. It has happened, Poirot said very gently. What? She asked, catching her breath. Something that our correspondent believes will mend the world. Come. In the drawing-room, Madame was already rising, summoned by nothing but the pressure of the hour upon the lungs. Wickham hovered at the mantel with his papers, like a man trying to be a screen. On the mantel itself should have stood, the little silver box. It was not there. Madame saw it first. Her hand went to her throat, and for the first time I saw the lady's poise acknowledge a crack. Giroux, she said. It was not a question, and yet the butler materialized from air, his face the faithful blank of a mirror. Madame, the silver box, she said. It is gone. Wickham turned, his color rising. Good God, who would? The same mind that leaves notes, Poirot said. One act must be answered by another. We begin with a whisper. We proceed to erasure. He went, not to the mantel, but to the low table beside it, and knelt with an old man's sigh that fooled no one. The cloth bore no mark. The wood, where the box had stood, held a faint, perfect square in the dust, erased with glove, then polished with a cuff, so one would see nothing unless one expected to. Poirot bent closer. A fiber, he murmured, and lifted on a pin the tiniest hair-like thread. Pale gray, almost white. Not from a housemaid's duster. From the lining of a glove when the seam is tired. Any of us could have touched it, Wickham said quickly. We all live here. Not all, said Poirot, and his eyes traveled to the door where the terrace air lay folded like cool silk. Marchand, had he gone? Yes. The umbrella was no longer in the stand. Yet near the stand on the parquet was a comma mark where water had not dried. It had not rained. A damp ferrule, or a ferrule wiped in haste. Madam, Poirot said softly, a small confession. The box contained nothing of value when last I saw it. Nothing, she repeated blankly. I removed the 2 notes an hour ago, he said, and a little life returned to her face. A breath that was not panic. I left inside a dozen blank cards and a length of ribbon. I also placed, he touched, with a certain mischief, the mantle's carved edge, a thread across the lid so fine that only a hand trained to objections would disturb it. He pointed. The ends of the thread were separated now, each lying like a tiny, guilty snake. Then whoever took it, Charlotte began, wished to believe he had destroyed what might betray him. Poirot finished. And so we learned something very useful. Our friend is not a prankster. He is frightened. Where's the box now? Madame asked, regaining herself. In the library, Mrs. Dawes said from the doorway, all oak and indignation, or what is left of it. We went at once. The library smelled, unmistakably, of paper that had been frightened into flame and beaten out. In the hearth, on the grate, lay a scatter of black petals, cinder cards with the Rochefort wreath blind stamped like a watermark of ghosts. The silver box sat in the fender, lid open, its velvet interior smudged with ash. Someone had thrust the contents upon the coals and stirred. There was the end of a ribbon gone brown. There a half-leaf of cream card curled like a moth's wing. But among these, to my surprise, were other, darker scraps. Fragment of something not card at all, heavier, fibrous, with a faint bluish thread. Poirot plucked one out with the tongs and blew gently. Note paper, yes, but also carbon. A carbon copy. He glanced at Wickham. From your office? Wickham blustered, then contained himself. I sent draft for Madame's signature this morning. No carbon remains here. None remains now, Poirot said mildly. He laid the scrap on the fender and looked at the hearth. Our friend worked quickly and without great skill. He feared discovery. He burned all, to be sure, to appear sure. Charlotte had gone pale. If it was only blank cards. It was not only blank cards in his mind, Poirot said. He believed he silenced paper. That is the second crime, mademoiselle, the crime against memory. It is sometimes more revealing than the crime against flesh. Giroux stood a fraction too still for innocence, but his voice, when it came, was steady. Shall I fetch water, monsieur, to make sure the fire is out? Do so, said Poirot, and close the east door. There will be no more coming and going tonight by ways that shrug. As Giroux withdrew, there came from the open terrace the sharp, childish ding-ding of a bicycle bell. Closer than before, almost at the balustrade. Marchand? But the bell receded at once, as if its owner had only tasted the air and gone. In its place, from the garden, Jacques' voice rose, Monsieur, and broke off. We hurried to the herb bed. There, under the rosemary, lay a shape that for 1 6-second my mind named body, before my eyes corrected it. Not a man, but bouquet, white roses, precise and cruelly fresh, laid upon the soil like a visitation. Tied about them with a faultless reef knot, left hand compensated, was crimson ribbon, and tucked beneath the knot, with neat perversity, was a cream card that might have been from any desk in Rochefort House. Before the roses fade, the same hand, small, tight, and almost painfully neat. Jacques' great hands hovered above the bouquet, as if they might bless or crush it. They were not here a minute ago, he said hoarsely. I swear it, M. Poirot. I know, Poirot said. He bent, not touching the roses, and tilted his head like a jeweler testing a stone. The stems, look, Hastings, half cut clean, half ragged, a blade of 2 histories. He lifted his eyes to the house. And we have, do we not, two men within our circle who love edges for different reasons. Marchand and Valcourt. I said, the names fall with a heaviness I could not hide. Names are shadows, Poirot murmured. Habits are bodies. He straightened. What is announced here is not only a schedule but philosophy. Our friend believes that a burn is to undo, that to cut is to compel. He is wrong in both. There's always something that refuses a flame. There's always a fiber that keeps the time of the hand. We carried the bouquet in a ghastly parody of an offering, and locked it in the pantry cold room at Poirot's insistence. Perfume is the most treacherous of witnesses, he said, but it clings to accomplices better than the truths. Back in the drawing room, Madame stood straighter than she had all day. You spoke of performance, M. Poirot. It has begun. It has advanced an act, he answered. A second crime, not blood but erasure. The next step, if we allow him, will be bolder. He looked from face to face. Charlotte, white but steady. Wickham, flushed and indignant. Giroux, composed to the point of vanishing. Mrs. Dawes, clenched like a fist. Jacques, bewildered and bruised by duty. I ask one thing only. No one leaves, no one enters. The doors are to be true doors, not actors. And you? Charlotte asked, voice very low. I, Poirot said gently, am going to the churchyard. At this hour? I protested. The thought of that black and white place in the falling dark made my skin prickle. At this hour, he said, because our friend loves patterns, and if he brings roses to the living bed, he will have also paid his respects to the dead stone. There his eyes gleamed. We may find not what he left, but what he forgot he always brings. He took his hat and, from the hall, a lantern, no umbrella, though the sky had gone to iron, and we stepped out into the thin, metallic evening. The bicycle bells sounded once, distantly, like a child's game calling us to choose sides. Poirot set his course toward the yews with a small, unhurried stride, the lantern low, his head poised as if listening for the shape of a footprint. The performance, I knew with a miserable certainty, had not merely begun. It had decided its audience. And somewhere between house and grave, the prompter waited with his finger at the line. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The churchyard at night is a different country. The yews seem to drink the last of the daylight and exhale a colder darkness. The stones, which by noon are merely stones, arrange themselves into a parliament of pale listeners. Poirot's lantern threw a circle on the path that moved with us like a coin sliding across felt. He walked with that precise little stride of his, each step an argument, each pause conclusion save for later. We went first to Victor Rochefort's grave. The bouquet from the afternoon we had locked away, but the grave itself wore signs a housemaid would not trouble to dust. Poirot knelt and set the lantern low. The marble lip that edged the bed had a faint smear along it, scarcely more than a dulling of light, as if something had kissed it and withdrawn. He touched the smear with a finger and lifted it to his nose. Resin, he murmured, not the clean spirit of the operating theater, the humbler stuff, the mender's friend. It dries water fast and leaves the breath of a carpenter's cupboard. Valcourt, I suggested. Perhaps, he said, or any man whose umbrella needed reminding of its purpose. His eyes traveled to the soil. And here, the heel we know, the crescent outward. He moved the lantern. The shadow of the little trench sharpened. And here the scuff where the toe should speak and does not. He steps away from weight and makes the earth tell a lesser truth. He glanced up at me with affectionate irony. You see Hastings? A conscience on a shoe. We rose and walked the inner perimeter, lantern beams skimming the grass. At the west gate, where Pritchard had once glimpsed a neat figure with an umbrella, Poirot paused. The stone jamb carried, on its rubbed edge, a dust like frost. He scraped it onto a nail and held it against the lantern. Lime, he said softly, finely ground, not the mason's rough grain. This is court chalk, Hastings. It clings to the hem and to the cuff, and to the nose of a shoe that kisses a baseline. He looked, not at the path, but at the sky where no one could hide. Our friend passed here after kindness to a white line, or he keeps company with those who do. Dr. Marchand marks out the club. I said, And Lucien, who would be president of anything that allows him a chair. Poirot returned. Do not marry chalk to gilt too soon. The club is a marriage market for half the village. But see how pretty the pattern becomes when one lays talc, resin, chalk together. He broke off, tilting his head. Echoed. From beyond the hedge, somewhere toward the river lane, sounded the double ting of a bicycle bell, soft, exploratory, and then, as if answered, a second chime nearer at hand. Poirot set the lantern on the wall and waited without any showmanship at all. The night, which had been a single piece, arranged itself into layers. The close cold, the far damp, the little trembling of leaves where a small creature considered our trespass. Then footsteps on grit, light, quicker than a heavy man makes, careful in the way of someone who thinks quiet is an art one can practice. "Pritchard," whispered a voice, low, male, impatient. "Non," said Poirot at once, and lifted the lantern. The light found Lucien Rochefort, hat brim down, coat too good for clandestine errands, umbrella hooked over his arm like a boast. He stopped, then smiled with credible speed. "Ah, and Poirot turned sexton?" From time to time, Poirot said amiably, "It is as well to pay respects when a man promises ceremonies for tomorrow. One grows sentimental." Lucien's smile thinned. "I came to speak to Pritchard about the hedge. It encroaches. One cannot have the graves rambled over. In the dark—" I asked before I could stop myself. "In the evening," he corrected, with a little shrug. "In daylight, one sees people who think one wishes to be seen. Good evening." He tipped his hat and walked to the gate, passing the jam too near for his cuff not to brush it. There was, when he went by us, an odor not of cologne but of something sharper that cologne would admire, the ghost of a chemical he had tried and failed to deny. We let him go. Poirot moved the lantern to the gatepost and examined the fresh place where Lucien's sleeve had made its speech. The chalk brightened his shade. "He belongs to the chalk," he said, almost tenderly. "Whether as president, player, or admirer, we shall see." We found Pritchard at last folding tarpaulins in his shed. The old man received our lantern as if it were a parishioner and told us, in his slow, exact way, that he had seen no one he would swear to and every one he would not. He did, however, volunteer that hedgerow's been brushed twice these last days by a brawly that can't mind his manners, a smear on the leaves, and once a flake of horned ferrule caught in the bramble. He fished in a tin, rummaged among bias-cut nails and miraculous screws, and produced, with the triumph of a conjurer, a tiny horn shaving curl like a comma. Poirot received it with reverence. "The little clue that wishes to retire," he said. "Merci, Pritchard. A ferrule that has been wed and rued with resin will shed its youth at inopportune moments." We left a coin that pretended to be insulted by gratitude and took the River Lane home. At the terrace, the house stood with all its windows thinking. Giroux admitted us gravely. Inside, the smell of singed paper had fled. In its place, the kitchen exhaled coffee with a defiant generosity. Madame, when we joined her, had recovered her armor. She sat with Wickham and Charlotte. Marchand had not returned. On the low table, neatly restored to its precise middle, lay the silver box, emptied, scrubbed, its velvet brushed, its gilt quieted. Giroux had been thorough. "You have good servants, madame," Poirot said. "I have old servants," she replied. "It is not the same excellence, but it is related." Wickham, who always smelt faintly of self-approval, tapped the document he had pressed upon her earlier. "If we may set aside theatricals, a minor matter, madam, but I should like your initial on the 4th page. It settles a small debt in Valmont, old club arrears from Victor's time." "Club?" I asked. "The tennis club," he said, impatient with my ignorance. Victor subscribed more than he attended. After his death, there were accounts to close, lines to mark, as it were. He smiled at his own wit. A small thing. Poirot's eyes had lit, then half closed, in that way that always makes me think of shutters in hot countries. "You, too, are the club, and Wickham?" "I am a solicitor," he said. "I am of all institutions that have minutes." "And Lucien?" Poirot asked conversationally. Lucien, Madame said, before Wickham could arrange the proper response, was born to preside. He collects committees as schoolboys collect stamps. Charlotte looked from one to the other. And Dr. Marchand draws lines when the groundsman is ill. Just so, said Poirot. We have, then, chalk for the many. Let us add ribbon for the few. Madam, your supply of crimson, where is it purchased? From Madame Molyneux's. Madame said with a little shrug. Everyone buys from her. She buys from Lion. Why? No reason but curiosity. Poirot returned. And the white roses. Are there many places where one may buy such purity in a village that prefers color? Madame's mouth made a shape about to pronounce florist, and then closed. Not in the village, she said slowly. In town, perhaps, or from a gentleman's garden. Victor bought cut roses often. He liked the table to have a silver throat. Her gaze went to the east terrace, as if remembering a thing she wished to have misremembered. After the funeral, I had the white bed grubbed out. It had become emblematic. She met Poirot's eyes with admirable steadiness. These roses are not mine. A gentleman's garden, Charlotte repeated, puzzled. Who grows white now? Marchand rents rooms, Wickham said. Jacques tends hedges, not roses. Giroux disapproves of petals. Lucien, he paused, satisfied by the shape of an idea. Lucien keeps a garden he pays others to admire. He has a mania for standards. I believe I have seen a white standard rose by a south wall. Alba, Madame said, distaste and memory braided. Yes. A bell sounded in the hall, and Marchand came in, bringing with him cool air and, to my nose like a conjurer's flourish, the faintest thread of the resin we had smelt upon the grave. He was pale under his professional color. There's a kind of tiredness even a doctor cannot hire someone to carry. Forgive me, he said. A fever that would not be persuaded. You are all well. As plays go, ours is brisk, said Poirot. Come, doctor, one little favor. The umbrella, if you please. The umbrella? Marchand blinked, then smiled with a serenity that did not quite touch the corners of his mouth. You interest yourself in meteorology now. He handed it over. Poirot did not look at the handle or the horn. He set the ferrule upon a folded square of tissue from his pocket and turned it with 2 fingers. A faint crescent of resin printed itself, like a watermark of glue. Valcourt is a good mender, Poirot observed, and the doctor inclined his head. I do not have new things for the pleasure of newness, he said. I carry the old to prove that repair is a virtue. Is there a crime in that? Repair is a philosophy, Poirot said lightly. It seeks to return the world to before. But the world is forward, doctor, incorrigibly. He returned the umbrella with a courtesy that annulled suspicion even as it retained it. You saw no one on the river lane? A bicycle passed me, Marchand said. A young man, cap pulled low. He rang the bell to warn me, not to taunt me. His eyes, cool and exact, went to the silver box. You have had excitement. Only a fire of papers, Charlotte said. Poirot relieved the box of its secrets before someone tried to absolve them. Someone, Marchand repeated. It was not a question. Poirot's gaze had gone to the mantel again, to the place where the thread had been broken. He stood there a moment in that still way of his, and then, without looking down, spoke as if to the fire-guard. Madam, Victor's will, after the amendments, left Lucien independent? Independent of us, she said, dependent upon his old habits. And your niece? He asked gently. Charlotte lifted her chin. I have enough to be decent, and not enough to be idle. And the gardener? An honest wage, Madame said. More than his father had. Victor made that amendment in a moment of clarity. And Giroux has a pride that earns its own interest, Madame returned, with a flicker of humor. Poirot looked pleased. We are in the presence of a family. Then even the unrelated are relatives. He turned to Marchand. Do you know Henri Valcourt? Who does not? Marchand said. He sharpens, he mends. He keeps his eyes low. He is a better man than his reputation, because reputation is expensive. Just so, said Poirot, as if that were one more paper to place upon a neat pile. He glanced at the mantel clock. It is late. No one will go to the church tonight. I have had the lock turned. In the morning we shall be very busy. Wickham, You will bring me a list of those who have keys to the east door other than Giroux. Madame Dawes, you will give me the names of every hand that touches the laundry starch. Laundry starch, Mrs. Dawes repeated, startled. It has the chalk's ambition on a humbler salary, Poirot said, smiling. And you, Hastings? Yes. You will accompany me to Madame Molyneux to speak of ribbon that travels, and to the club to speak of chalk that clings. We will walk by Lucy and Southwall and admire a standard that keeps bad company in a good garden. Why? He lifted a finger. Because our friend cannot resist pattern. He leaves the same 3 fingerprints wherever he believes himself most immaculate. The residue of repair, the discipline of line, the pretext of cleanliness. He tucked the little horn shaving from Pritchard's tin into his pocketbook, as one might put away a saint's relic. And somewhere among Ami, he left the one fiber that will not burn. Charlotte, who had listened without interruption, now spoke with that mixture of courage and fear I had come to respect in her. You think he is one of us? I think, said Poirot, with a kindness that did not abdicate severity, that the house has learned to speak the voice of its master even after his death. Someone imitates Victor's tidiness of cruelty. Someone believes in erasure as Victor believed in economy. The roses are a signature and a disguise. Madame stood. What do you need from me? Permission to offend, said Poirot simply. Tomorrow I shall make impertinent comparisons. I shall ask old women what the young men pay and young men how they tie their shoes. I shall look at the underside of respectability and find, as one always finds, mud. You will allow me, and you will not flinch. She inclined her head. You have it. Bon. He closed his notebook with a small sound as satisfying as a lock. Then we sleep. If our friend is impatient, he will make his mistake before dawn. If he is cautious, he will wait for noon. In either case, the pattern is set. And when a pattern is set, Hastings, it can be read. I finished trying to match his confidence in falling, as usual, a little short. We parted with the formalities of a garrison that expects attack, but keeps its silver polished. In our lodgings, Poirot set the horn shaving and the chalk smear upon the mantel, as other men might set snuff in matches. He arranged his shoes perfectly parallel, as if to remind the knight that some laws are mercifully inviolable, and before he extinguished the lamp, said in that gentle, maddening tone, Demain, mon ami. We tug very lightly at 3 threads. One will tighten. It always does. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The following morning dawned pale and brittle. A sky stretched in over the rooftops like paper too long in the sun. Poirot, already immaculate in a gray suit and soft hat, took his coffee with the air of a man anticipating not pleasure but precision. He spoke little, his mind clearly rehearsing a choreography of errands that, to me, seemed far too small to merit such intense rehearsal. By mid-morning we were at Madame Molyneux's, the village's only purveyor of ribbon, thread, and the sort of haberdashery one imagines in drawers scented with lavender. The bell over the door tinkled, and we were received by Madame herself, a round, rosy woman with a voice like silk drawn through the hand. M. Poirot, she exclaimed. I have heard you are in the village, solving something. Only tidying, madam, Poirot said, bowing. You will help me with a knot. She laughed, thinking a jest, and produced a bowl of crimson ribbon Madame Rochefort favored. 2 wits, she explained, but only one from Lyon. The other is local, cheaper, but the color fades. She unwound a length of each. Poirot laid them side by side. To my eye they were identical, but he touched the edge of the Lyon ribbon with a fingertip and murmured, The selvage is woven tighter. It frays inward. Very few notice, Madame Molyneux said. Madame Rochefort always has the Lion. It costs, but she does not like her bows to look weary. And yet, Poirot said softly, someone in her house is using the local ribbon. Someone who cuts it short, ties it hard, and never thinks the color will last beyond its purpose. Madame tilted her head. You can tell that? I can tell that, Poirot replied. And more, who bought the last yard. She consulted a small ledger with neat columns. 2 days ago, M. Giroux the butler, a yard only. Paid in coins. He said Madame wished to test a match. Poirot's eyes warmed, but he said only, merci, madame, and made his purchase, 2 yards of lion ribbon wound carefully on a card. From there, we walked to the Valmont Tennis Club. The courts were empty, the chalk line still crisp from some early morning maintenance. The steward, a leathery man with the stance of perpetual serve, greeted us warily. Poirot admired the lines, then bent to touch one, rubbing the powder between thumb and forefinger. "This is not ordinary chalk," he remarked. "It clings like starch." The steward nodded. "Mixed with laundry starch to keep it through a shower. Marchand swears by it when he marks for us. Lucien Rochefort, too, if he can get him to bend his back that far." "And Wickham?" The steward laughed. "He prefers the committee room to the court. Talks a good game, though." Poirot made a note and asked to see the marking box. Within lay the white mixture, a scoop, and, at the bottom, a faint curl of crimson ribbon, no longer than a matchstick, frayed at both ends. Poirot took it up with his handkerchief, examined it without expression, and tucked it into his pocketbook. On our way back, we passed along Lucien Rochefort's south wall. A standard rose stood there, pale as porcelain, its early blooms already open to the sun. Poirot lingered, touching a fallen petal on the path. It was unblemished, save for a faint nick at the edge, as though it had been bruised by a blade. He straightened abruptly. "We go now to the house, Hastings. I have seen enough for today." When we arrived at Rochefort House, Giroux admitted us with his usual measured courtesy. Poirot's eyes flicked at once to the silver box on the mantel, untouched since last night, at least at a casual view. "Madam," he said, bowing, "I should like to see your laundry room." The request startled her, but she led us down a narrow service stair to a low, warm chamber smelling of soap and steam. Mrs. Dawes was there, supervising the folding of freshly starched linen. In a covered tin on the shelf was a fine white powder. Poirot dipped a fingertip, rubbed it, and nodded. "The same starch as on the courts," he murmured to me. He thanked Mrs. Dawes, asked a few innocent questions about who handled the starch, then followed Madame back upstairs. When we were alone in the small sitting room, Poirot took from his pocket the scrap of local ribbon from Molyneux's, the fragment from the marking box, and a petal from Lucien's rose. He laid them in a row on the table, regarding them as though they were suspects lined up for inspection. "The ribbon," he said, "tells me whose hand tied the last bouquet. The chalk tells me who prepared for our visitor to pass unseen. And the rose, Hastings, the rose tells me that someone cannot resist taking from their own garden, even when they wish to implicate another. You know who it is?" I asked. "I know how it is," he corrected. "The who will present itself when the how grows impatient. And it will. The mind that plays with patterns cannot leave them unfinished." He gathered the items, replaced them in his pocketbook, and smiled in that infuriatingly serene way. "For now, mon ami, we say nothing. The little gray cells are satisfied, but the mouth must be patient." It was the last remark he made on the subject all day, but I noticed, as the light began to fade, that he positioned himself once more in the east corridor, watching, listening, for the smallest rustle that might betray the final tightening of the knot. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. By late afternoon, the house had begun to feel like a stage whose actors no longer trusted one another. Conversation, where it occurred, had an edge. Doors were closed more firmly than needed. Even the measured steps of Giroux along the passage sounded, to my ear, like a metronome counting down some undisclosed cue. Poirot was quiet, but watchful. He stationed himself in the drawing-room with the ease of a man reading by the fire, though I noted that from his chair he could see both the mantel where the silver box stood and the door leading to the east corridor. He glanced at his watch once or twice, but made no move to leave. It was Charlotte who broke the uneasy silence, entering with a book in her hand. She stopped short at the sight of Wickham, who had been leafing through some papers on the side table. "You have an office for that," she said, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. Wickham replaced the papers with exaggerated care. "I came to find Madame's signature on a receipt. I thought it might be here. You suspect me of rifling through your novels?" "Only of putting your hands where they don't belong," Charlotte returned, and crossed to the window. Ignoring him, Madame Rochefort entered then, her expression composed but her color heightened. "What is this tone, Charlotte?" "Merely a misunderstanding," Wickham said smoothly. "Your niece is protective of the family papers." "An admirable quality," Madame replied, though the glance she gave him was cool enough to put frost on a lampshade. Poirot watched the exchange with that faint, amused narrowing of the eyes I have come to know as a signal that he is not intervening, because the quarrel is telling him more than any question could. From the doorway, Marchand's voice joined the fray, mild and measured. "Surely, in this house, we have enough enemies without manufacturing them." He came in, gloves in one hand, the inevitable umbrella in the other. If you must quarrel, quarrel with the weather. It is at least impartial. Charlotte turned to him. "And what would you have us do? Pretend there's no danger?" "Danger grows in the soil we feed it," Marchand replied. "We water it with suspicion, and it flowers." Giroux entered quietly with the tea tray. He set it down between Madame and Poirot, his gloved hands precise in every motion. Poirot thanked him, but his eyes lingered, just for a moment, on the faint gray seam along one thumb where the stitching had begun to give. "Merci, Giroux," Poirot said, and the butler withdrew without comment. As we took tea, Jacques appeared at the threshold, cap in hand, his boots faintly dusted with the pale powder of the garden paths. "Beg pardon, madam," he said. "There's been someone at the herb bed again. Footprints, fresh." The effect was instantaneous. Charlotte set down her cup with a clatter. Wickham muttered something about brazen daylight. Madame's lips thinned. Poirot rose at once. "Show me." We went in a small procession to the terrace. There, beneath the rosemary, the crescent heel print had appeared again, as familiar now to me as a signature. This time, however, there was something new. A tiny shred of crimson ribbon caught in the low branches, its edge frayed inward exactly as Poirot had remarked on that morning at Madame Molyneux's. He took it delicately between forefinger and thumb. "Not lion," he murmured, almost to himself. "Local, and cut short." Wickham crouched to look, frowning. Anyone might have snagged it here days ago. Poirot straightened. "Non, it is the same hand as yesterday and the day before. He treads lightly, but he leaves a little of himself behind." Charlotte's voice was low but fierce. "Why not confront them now?" "Because," Poirot said, "we do not yet know which of them it is. And if we accuse in ignorance, we warn in earnest." Marchand, who had been silent, now spoke. "It is perhaps time to consider the obvious, that this is a private quarrel, not a public crime. Someone here resents another, and the rest of us are merely the audience." "Then the curtain will fall on the wrong act," Charlotte said. The remark hung in the air like smoke until Madame turned back toward the house. Her chin lifted. "We will not stand about speculating in the cold. Come inside. All of you." Back in the drawing-room, the group seemed to splinter. Wickham planted himself by the mantel, blocking access to the silver box. Charlotte withdrew to the window seat with her book unopened. Marchand took a chair near the fire, watching the rest of us over steepled fingers. Poirot resumed his seat, but leaned toward me slightly. "Observe, Hastings, the shifting of positions. Wickham claims the mantle, Charlotte the light, Marchand the warmth. Each takes the place that offers advantage, whether of reach of sight or of comfort. In this, as in all things, there is choice." The clock chimed the half-hour. Poirot's gaze traveled once more to the silver box. Then he stood abruptly. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have a small request. This evening, I shall require you all in the library after dinner. There is something I wish to demonstrate. Until then, I ask only that no one leave the house, and that nothing is added to or removed from that box." "Under whose authority?" Wickham demanded, half in jest. "Under the authority," Poirot said pleasantly, "of one who dislikes his endings untidy." The rest of the afternoon passed in a strained quiet. I found myself glancing toward the east corridor more than once, half expecting the faint brush of movement or the sound of the door that shrugged. But nothing came, only the sense of the pattern tightening, as if we were all knots in a single piece of ribbon being drawn toward the same unseen point. And in Poirot's eyes there was that glint I had learned to recognize, the knowledge of something held in reserve, a secret clue that he would not yet share even with me. For Poirot, timing was as much a weapon as deduction. Chapter 12, The Confrontation. Dinner that evening was a formal, uneasy affair. Each course served with the precision of ritual, but none of the pleasure. Conversation limped along in short, perfunctory exchanges, as though the diners feared their words might be used against them before dessert. Poirot was in an almost exaggeratedly benign mood, complimenting Madame on the seasoning of the soup, praising Jacques for the neatness of the herb borders, inquiring of Giroux whether the wine cellar was in perfect order. It was precisely the kind of calm that, from Poirot, made my skin prickle. When coffee was served, Madame inclined her head toward him. "Shall we move to the library, as you asked, M. Poirot?" "If you please, Madame." He rose, and the rest followed. Charlotte from her place beside her aunt, Marchand carrying his cup with the doctor's steady hand, Wickham taking up a position behind the ladies, Giroux silent as the air. The library was warmly lit, a small fire in the grate pushing back the early evening chill. Poirot directed us to sit, not in a line, but scattered, as if he wished to see how we would choose our vantage points. Wickham took the armchair nearest the fire. Marchand leaned against the mantel, one elbow lightly resting beside the silver box, which Poirot had brought here from the drawing-room. Charlotte seated herself near the desk. Madame stood by the window, hands folded. Poirot began without ceremony. "Miss Amos, for some days now, a series of small acts has disturbed this house. Notes left, flowers placed, objects moved. At first, these seemed no more than a game, a piece of theater. But yesterday, an object was removed from this very room and subjected to an attempted destruction. And this afternoon, the same intruder visited the rosemary bed, leaving his signature behind." He opened the silver box and removed, not the anonymous notes. They were elsewhere, but a small card tied with a scrap of crimson ribbon. "The signature," he said, "is the knot, tied by one who compensates with the left hand, cut by a blade with a clean florist's edge on one side and a rougher pocket-knife's tear on the other. This M.E.S. Amos is a hand that works both with precision and with haste." Marchand shifted slightly. "You make it sound very specific." "It is very specific." Poirot agreed. "It is also very revealing. I have sought to learn who in this house has access to ribbon that is not of Madame's usual lie and make. I found it, purchased from Madame Molyneux by M. Giroux, ostensibly for a test. And yet the ribbon caught today in the rosemary matches it exactly." Giroux's expression did not flicker. "I bought it at Madame's request." "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly, "but the knot tells more than the purchase. A left-hand compensation, M.E.S. Amos, is rare enough among right-handed people that it is like a monogram on a letter. It is a habit, and habits betray us." Charlotte sat forward. "So you mean Giroux?" "Non, mademoiselle," Poirot said quickly. Giroux is not the only one whose knot compensates left. Dr. Marchand ties the same way. So does our good Jacques when he binds twine in the garden. The knot is a whisper, not a verdict." Wickham gave a short laugh. "Then what is the point of all this, if it could be any of them?" "The point," Poirot said softly, "is that one among them believes he is unseen when he is most visible. He believes his pattern invisible because it is simple, but it is simplicity that shows a hand." He crossed the desk and laid down a fallen petal from Lucien's white standard rose. "These roses, pure and pale, come from a single garden. One petal, found by me, bore a nick from a blade, half a bouquet cut with a clean slant, the other half with rough tear. 2 blades, 2 histories, 1 bouquet. Who is both at hand? Who uses a florist's knife for the work that must be beautiful, and a pocket knife for the work that must be hurried? And who, M.E.S. Amos, has also the chalk of the tennis court on his cuffs, the resin of an old pharaoh on his umbrella, and the starch of the laundry and the powder he leaves on the table. Marchand's fingers tighten on the mantle, just enough to betray themselves to a watching eye. You think this is me? I think, Poirot said evenly, that you have walked the path from club to garden to grave, that you have mended what should have been replaced, that you have taken roses from a neighbor's wall and laid them where they would wound. Marchand's color rose. You build a story from coincidence. It is no coincidence, Poirot replied, "that the most recent note was found under the rosemary not 2 minutes after you passed that way to take the air. Nor is it chance that the resin on the grave matches the resin used on your umbrella, as confirmed by the man who mended it, or that the chalk on the gatepost matches the starch you admit to mixing for club courts. These are not isolated accidents. They are the trail of a man too confident in the tidiness of his work to see the fibers he leaves behind." Wickham leaned forward, a predator scenting advantage. "If you're so sure, Poirot, why not have him arrested?" Poirot's gaze moved from Wickham to Marchand and back again. "Because, monsieur, the law is not satisfied by a pattern. It wants a last stitch, and our friend here has not yet made his final knot." Madame's voice, calm but iron under the surface, broke the taut silence. "Why, doctor? If it is true, why do this?" Marchand met her eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw something raw there, a flicker of personal grievance. But he only said, "You have made up your minds already. There is nothing to be gained by answering." Poirot inclined his head, as though granting him the last word for now. "Then I will say this. The one who plays with roses and ribbons does so because he wishes to write the ending of a story left unfinished by Victor Rochefort. But I will write that ending myself, and I will do so tomorrow." It was a dismissal in all but name. One by one they left Charlotte Lass, her eyes troubled, Wickham brisk, as though hurrying to capitalize on what he had heard. Giroux silent, inscrutable. When we were alone, I turned to Poirot. "You've all but named him. Why not finish it?" "Because," he said, lowering himself into the chair by the fire, "the little gray cells have one more thing to hear. Tonight, Hastings, our visitor, will come again, either to erase, to place, or to tie. And when he does, I will be waiting with the knot he cannot untie." He looked into the fire, and in the quiet I could almost hear the house itself drawing breath for what would come. Chapter 13. The Knot Tightens. The house, that night, seemed to hold its own breath. Even the wind had stilled, as though it too was listening. Madame had retired early, pleading a headache. Charlotte followed soon after, though I doubted she would sleep. Wickham remained in the drawing-room, occupying himself with a book whose pages he turned far too quickly to be reading. Dr. Marchand withdrew without a word, and Giroux went about his duties with the same inscrutable composure he had worn all day. Poirot, however, showed no signs of fatigue. After the others had gone, he settled himself in the library with the air of a man awaiting a late appointment. His fingers toyed idly with the scrap of crimson ribbon, though I knew that every sense of his was attuned to the smallest sound. "Hastings," he said at last, "do you remember, in our younger days, how often we would wait for the criminal to act? It is the same now. The pattern is almost complete. Tonight, the final thread will be drawn." I sat in the armchair nearest the fire, watching the flames throw shifting shadows on the bookcases. Outside, the clock on the stable tower chimed 11. Poirot did not move. Midnight came, then 1:30. Still we waited. It was just before 1 when a sound reached us. Faint, almost indistinct. A door latch, perhaps, or the whisper of fabric against wood. Poirot raised a hand, his eyes narrowing. Slowly, deliberately, he stood and crossed the door, opening it just enough to peer into the darkened corridor. The faintest light, no more than a candle flame, flickered at the far end. A figure moved silently toward the library, pausing at intervals to listen. In one hand they carried a small parcel, in the other something that glinted faintly in the light. Poirot stepped back into the shadows, drawing me with him. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, "our nocturnal gardener." The figure entered, closing the door behind them. They crossed to the desk and set down the parcel, unwrapping it to reveal a small cluster of white roses, fresh, but with several petals bruised. From a pocket came the crimson ribbon, and then, with unhurried precision, they began to tie it around the stems. It was then that Poirot moved. He did not startle the intruder with a shout, as I half expected, but rather advanced with the quiet authority of one who had been expected all along. "Bonsoir, Dr. Marchand," he said softly. Marchand froze, his hand still on the knot. For a long moment, he did not look up. When he did, his face was composed. Too composed. I see you could not wait until morning after all. Poirot gestured toward the flowers. You persist, even knowing you are watched. That, I think, is not arrogance, but necessity. You cannot stop yourself. The ritual must be completed. Marchand's eyes flashed. Call it what you like. These are not your dead. Poirot, you cannot understand. On the contrary, Poirot said, I understand very well. This is not about Victor Rochefort's death. It is about his life, and the part of it you believe was stolen from you. You write in flowers and ribbons because words will betray too much. Marchand laughed, short, bitter. You think this is vengeance? No, it is restoration. He took from me, and I am merely returning the truth to where it belongs. Poirot regarded him steadily. And yet you risk Madame's peace, the reputation of this house, perhaps even your own freedom. Why? Because you believe your truth must be seen. That is why you placed the notes. That is why you left the petals where they would be found. You wanted anyone to understand. Marchand's jaw tightened. And have you understood, Poirot? Yes, Poirot said. And tomorrow, so will everyone else. But tonight, you will leave these where they are, and you will return to your room without another word. For a moment, I thought Marchand might refuse. But something in Poirot's tone, calm, unyielding, seemed to strip the defiance from him. He set down the roses, untied the ribbon, and placed both on the desk. Without another glance, he walked past us and left the library, his steps measured but heavy. Poirot waited until the sound of his tread had faded. Then he picked up the ribbon and examined the knot Marchand had begun. See, Hastings? Even half finished, it tells a tale. The left-hand compensation, the uneven cut, it is the mark of the man. I leaned closer. Then why let him go? You could have ended it now. Because, Poirot said, replacing the ribbon in the silver box, the truth, to be whole, must be heard in the light of day. And when I speak it tomorrow, there will be no shadows left for him to hide in. He closed the box with a soft click. Come, mon ami, we will sleep now. In the morning, the knot will be pulled tight, and the story will end as it must. Yet as we left the library, I could not help but glance back at the roses lying on the desk, their white petals bruised as though they too had endured some quiet violence. And I wondered just what truth would come of the dawn. Chapter 14, Gathering in the Library. Morning brought a brittle clarity to the air, the sort that makes even the smallest sound carry further than it should. The frost on the terrace glittered like ground glass, and the sunlight, though bright, seemed without warmth. I found Poirot already at the breakfast table, sipping coffee and eating a perfectly symmetrical arrangement of toast and marmalade. He greeted me with an affable nod, but there was a composure about him that hinted the day had been mapped in his mind long before the sun had risen. Today, Hastings, he said, we will tie the final bow. But first, the guests must be made ready. By guests, he meant the household, each of whom, by some tacit awareness, seemed to sense that the hours ahead would not pass without confrontation. Charlotte appeared late, dressed in dark green, her hair coiled so tightly that not a strand escaped. Wickham entered next, carrying a small sheaf of letters that he placed ostentatiously on the sideboard before sitting, his glance darting toward the corridor as though expecting someone. Dr. Marchand joined us last, his manner studiedly calm, the morning paper tucked beneath his arm. He offered polite greetings and took his place without comment. If the events of the night before had left their mark on him, it was hidden beneath the habitual smoothness of his speech and bearing. Madame Rochefort did not come down to breakfast, sending word instead that she would remain in her rooms until the appointed gathering in the library. Her absence lent the meal an odd formality, as though we were players waiting for the principal character to enter. Poirot spoke little. He made small inquiries after Charlotte's health, remarked on the unusual pattern of frost along garden walls, and once, only once, allowed his gaze to linger on Marchand a beat longer than courtesy demanded. When the table was cleared, he rose. Mess Amos, at 11 o'clock precisely. I shall ask you to join me in the library. Until then, I suggest you attend to whatever matters remain for you here in the house. For afterwards, he paused, letting the silence draw just taut enough. Afterwards, there will be no more uncertainty. Whitcomb gave a short laugh. You make it sound like an execution. Poirot inclined his head gravely. An execution of sorts of falsehood. The next 2 hours passed in a peculiar, unsettled rhythm. From my chair in the drawing room, I could hear the faint sounds of movement in the upper floors. Doors opening and closing, the muted tread of Giroux in the hallway. Charlotte's lighter step crossing to her aunt's room. Once, a murmur of voices, Charlotte's sharp, Madame's low, carried down the stairs before subsiding into silence. Marchand kept mostly to himself, pacing the terrace with an unlit cigarette between his fingers. The frost had begun to melt in the sunlight, leaving dark footprints that traced his slow circuit. At 5 minutes to 11, Giroux appeared in the doorway. The library is ready, monsieur. Poirot nodded. Merci, Giroux. Bring Madame when she is prepared. We entered to find the room subtly altered. The curtains had been drawn back fully, flooding the space with pale winter light. On the central table, the silver box sat precisely in the middle, polished to a mirror sheen. Beside it lay the crimson ribbon and the bruised white roses from the night before, now in a plain glass vase. One by one, the others arrived. Charlotte took a seat to the left of the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Whitcomb positioned himself by the mantel, as if to stand guard over it. Marchand chose a chair opposite Charlotte, his gaze resting briefly, too briefly, on the roses before turning to Poirot. Madame entered last, moving with a measured dignity that made the room seem to still around her. She took the high-backed chair at the head of the table and folded her hands. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "you have gathered us here for your explanation. I trust it will be worth the anticipation." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, it is my hope that it will be worth far more than that. It will be worth the truth." He glanced at the clock. "Shall we begin? But first, Hastings, if you please, draw the door to. I do not wish us to be interrupted." I did so, the click of the latch sounding unusually loud in the hush. Poirot stepped closer to the table, resting one fingertip lightly on the silver box. "This," he said, "has been our silent witness. It has held, not merely flowers and ribbons, but the record of a quarrel, no, of a grief, played out in secret and in symbol. For weeks, the signs have been there, the choice of bloom, the bruising of petals, the frayed edge of the ribbon, each an act of communication, though the message was not for all to read." He looked from face to face. "And yet someone has read it. Someone in this room understood, perhaps too well, and chose to act. That is why we are here." The silence thickened. Charlotte's eyes never left him. Whitcomb shifted once, then stilled. Marchand's expression was unreadable. Poirot reached for the vase, drawing out the roses with delicate care. "Last night these were brought. Chapter 15, The Unraveling Thread." Poirot held the roses aloft for a moment, their pale heads drooping, the bruised petals catching the morning light in faint shadows of mauve. He let them rest again on the table, arranging them so that the ribbon lay in plain view beside them. His fingertips lingered on the frayed edge as if it were the most delicate clue in the world. "You see, Mies Amos," he began, his voice low but carrying, "a ribbon is not merely decoration. In the hands of one who understands its language, it can bind memory or choke it." Madame Rochefort shifted slightly in her chair, her gaze fixed on the flowers but her expression guarded. Charlotte's lips pressed together, a flash of something, anger, perhaps, flickering in her eyes before she smoothed it away. Whitcomb stood with his arms crossed, a faint furrow between his brows, as though unwilling to betray interest. Dr. Marchand alone appeared calm, though his hands rested flat on his knees, and I noticed the slightest tremor in his right thumb. Poirot moved to the silver box, opening it with its familiar soft click. Inside, the earlier tokens, each one chosen with care, each one delivered with a precision that speaks of habit. This is not the work of an opportunist, but of one for whom the act itself is ritual. He paused, glancing at me as if to invite the room's attention to the smallest detail. "Hastings, you recall last night, the knot begun but unfinished?" I nodded. "You said it bore the mark of the man." "Just so. It is the smallest things, always. The bias of the cut, the tilt of the loop. They are as distinctive as handwriting. And here, he touched the ribbon, the same mark, repeated over weeks, tells its own story. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. But what does it tell, Monsieur Poirot? Who would send such things? Poirot looked at her gravely. One who could not speak openly, mademoiselle, because to speak would invite ruin or ridicule. And yet, silence was unbearable. So he spoke in petals and thread, trusting that one person would understand. Madame's voice was cool, though I detected a faint tremor beneath it. And this one person, do they understand? Oui, madame, Poirot replied. And they acted. The recent disturbances in this house, the misplaced letters, the conversations overheard, the sense that eyes followed unseen, these were not accidents. They were the deliberate measures of one who sought to push the truth into daylight. Whitcomb straightened, a trace of impatience in his tone. You talk in riddles, Poirot. If you've something to say, then say it. Poirot's eyes met his. Patience, monsieur. The knot must be untied in the correct order, or it tightens beyond release. He turned back to the table, resting his palms upon it. The truth is this. The death of Victor Rochefort did not end the quarrels that shadowed his last months. They have continued here, in symbolic form, between those who loved him and those who resented the hold he had over them. But one, has gone beyond mere symbols. Charlotte's fingers gripped the arms of her chair. Beyond? She asked, her voice taut. Yes, Poirot said. From exchange of floral messages to the planting of evidence, from quiet hints to overt threats, and finally, to a meeting arranged in secret, under cover of night, to settle the matter once and for all. Marchand's composure cracked, if only for a heartbeat. His gaze flickered toward Madame, then back to Poirot. And yet here we all are, very much alive, he said. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, for the act was interrupted. By me. What I witnessed was not the end of a life, but the end of a pretense. This morning, I will show you how the chain began, where it was meant to lead, and who intended to make the final cut. Madame's eyes narrowed. You mean to accuse someone in this room? Poirot's smile was small, almost sorrowful. No, madame, I mean to reveal them. He stepped back, folding his hands behind him. Before I name them, I will give them one chance, to speak for themselves. For if they remain silent, I will speak, and my words will leave no doubt. The room was very still. Only the faint ticking of the mantel clock marked the passing seconds. Charlotte looked from face to face. Whitcomb's jaw set like stone, Marchand's gaze fixed on the roses, his expression unreadable. Poirot waited. The moment stretched, the silence deepening until it seemed almost physical. Then, at last, a voice broke it, quiet, steady, but carrying in the hush. You have always known, haven't you, Monsieur Poirot? All eyes turned toward the speaker. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, he said softly. From the first moment, the others exchanged quick, startled glances. The air in the library felt charged, as if we were standing at the edge of some unseen precipice. Poirot stepped forward, the faintest glint of steel in his voice. Then let us finish what we began. Tell us all, what you have done and why. The confession, when it came, did not come as a shout or a sob, but as a slow unspooling of words, deliberate and measured, like the unwinding of a ribbon from a tightly bound stem. And with each word, the knot of the past began to loosen, though what lay beneath we had yet to see. Chapter 16, The Confession in Shadows. The voice that had spoken, low, almost weary, was unmistakable. It was Charlotte's. She did not look at anyone as she spoke. Her eyes were fixed on the silver box, as though the flowers within were the only witnesses she could bear to face. Yes, she said again in that same quiet tone. You knew from the moment you saw me in the garden. The way I looked at the ribbon, the way I held it. I didn't even realize how much I gave away. The others remained motionless, their surprise sharpened by the unlikeliness of it. Madame Rochefort's lips pressed into a single line, though her knuckles whitened on the arms of her chair. Whitcomb's brow furrowed in disbelief, and Dr. Marchand tilted his head slightly, as though some part of him had suspected and now sought to confirm the truth in her words. Poirot regarded her steadily, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "I knew, mademoiselle, not because of the ribbon alone, but because of the eyes. The eyes, they do not lie. When the roses were brought in, you did not see flowers. You saw a message, and you answered it." Charlotte gave a brittle laugh, the sound out of place in the charged quiet. "It began so long ago, I hardly know where to start. Victor," she glanced briefly at Madame, "he kept everything locked inside. If he was angry, he would write a note and place it in the box. If he was pleased, he would send a bloom. And when he died, I found the key." Whitcomb shifted, his voice low but edged. "You mean you carried on with this little theater?" Her head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. "It was not theater, Mr. Whitcomb. It was the only way left to speak with someone who could not answer aloud." Madame understood it, at first, but then the flowers changed. The bruised petals, the torn ribbon, those weren't mine. A murmur passed between Marchand and Madame, too quiet to make out. Poirot lifted a hand for silence. "Go on, mademoiselle," he urged. "You speak now to all of us." Charlotte took a slow breath. "When I saw those roses yesterday, the ones with the crushed edges, I knew someone else was using the box. Someone who wanted to say something very different. I tried to remove them before they were found, but you," she nodded faintly to Poirot, "were already there. I thought if I could find out who it was, I could stop them before they did something worse." Her voice faltered, and for the first time her composure cracked. "Last night, I followed them. I saw them slip into the library. I thought perhaps it would only be another flower, another ribbon. But when I saw what they carried, I knew they meant to use the box one last time, not to send a message, but to hide something." The silence that followed was heavy, stretching until it seemed the air itself might split under its weight. Poirot did not speak. He merely regarded her with that unreadable expression of his, neither condemning nor absolving. Madame Rochefort broke the quiet, her voice tight. "And you will now tell us, Charlotte, who the shadow was?" Charlotte looked at her for a long moment, then lowered her gaze. "I cannot. Not yet." It was Poirot who answered in her stead. "Non, madame. She cannot, because the proof, how do you say, is delicate. Too delicate to survive the wrong handling. But I have it, and I will show you. In time." Whitcomb let out a sharp breath. "So we're still be kept in suspense?" "Suspense," Poirot said softly, "is the breathing space before truth, and I assure you, monsieur, it is very nearly over." He stepped around the table, pausing behind Charlotte's chair. "Mademoiselle, you have done more than you realize. You have given me not only the key to this puzzle, but the means to close it. There remains only one matter. The question of motive. That MES Amos is what will decide everything." His gaze swept the room, resting on each face in turn. "For I tell you this, without the motive, the act is meaningless. And the motive, in this case, is older than the quarrels, older even than the box. It is a matter of pride, of inheritance, and of fear." Charlotte turned her face away, her shoulders rigid. Madame's expression was carved from stone, and Marchand had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the roses as though they might wither under his scrutiny. Whitcomb stared at Poirot, waiting for him to go on. But Poirot only adjusted the position of the silver box on the table, his movements precise, deliberate. "We will speak of it shortly. For now, I think we have heard enough of shadows. The next words spoken in this room will be those of the one who sought to make the final cut." He closed the box with a soft, decisive click. "And when they speak, MES Amos, we shall all understand." The mantel clock struck the half hour, its chime clear in the stillness. No one moved. It was as though we were all caught in the narrow space between revelation and ruin, suspended on the thinnest of threads, waiting for it to snap. Chapter 17. The thread drawn tight. The half-hour chime faded into the hush like ripples dissolving on still water. Poirot's hands rested lightly upon the silver box, as though it were an anchor holding him and all of us in place. No one dared to speak, though I could feel the words swelling behind the silence, pressing against it like a tide. Charlotte's breathing was steady, but her gaze was fixed on the carpet, the line of her jaw betraying the effort it took to remain silent. Madame Rochefort, by contrast, sat so straight in her chair she might have been carved there, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tapping a subtle rhythm against the armrest. Dr. Marchand leaned forward slightly, his brow creased in concentration, and Wickham shifted with the restless irritation of a man who abhors being made to wait. Poirot let the silence extend just long enough to make them lean inward. Then, with a delicate motion, he opened the box again. Inside, the roses lay unchanged, their petals beginning to curl faintly at the edges, the ribbon still darkened by that troubling stain. "Every puzzle," he began softly, "has two parts, the pieces themselves, and the frame in which they are set. One without the other is confusion. Together, they give the truth its shape. We have here our pieces, the ribbon, the flowers, the hand that placed them. What we have lacked is the frame." Wickham made a faint sound of impatience. "And this frame, I take it, is our mysterious motive?" "Just so, monsieur. Without it, you see, all that remains is a series of curious gestures. But with it," Poirot allowed the words to linger, "with it, the gestures become a language of intent." He closed the box once more, this time with a firmer hand, and began to pace slowly before the hearth. "Consider, if you will, the family of Madame Rochefort. A name of some standing, yes? A history entwined with the land, the estate, the traditions that have endured for generations. Such families, they guard not only their possessions but their pride. And pride, Miss Amos, is a curious thing. It can inspire act of great beauty or of great cruelty." Madame's lips tightened, though she said nothing. Marchand's eyes flickered briefly toward her before returning to Poirot. "Now," Poirot continued, "imagine that within such a family there exists a dispute, quiet perhaps but persistent, a matter of inheritance, of right, of who shall carry forward the name and the lands. Sometimes such quarrels are spoken openly. Other times they are fought in whispers, with gestures, with symbols." His gaze dropped the box. "Our silver box is served as one such weapon. Once, perhaps, it was an intimate exchange between husband and wife. But in time, it became something else, a means of wounding without words." Charlotte's head lifted slightly at that, her eyes bright with some unspoken recognition. Poirot stopped pacing and turned toward her. "Mademoiselle, you sought to intercept the roses not only because they were from the wrong sender, but because they carried the wrong message." "Yes." Her lips parted, but before she could reply, Madame's voice cut through the air, cool and steady. "You are treading close to accusation, Monsieur Poirot." "Close, madame," he agreed mildly, "but not yet upon it. That moment will come when I have shown, beyond doubt, why the roses were left at the grave, and why their meaning was meant for the living, not the dead." The word seemed to press upon the room like a weight. Wickham leaned back with faint scoff, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Marchand had gone very still again, hands clasped tightly before him. Poirot returned to the table and, with a precise motion, removed the ribbon from the roses. He held it up between thumb and forefinger, letting the light fall across its frayed edges. "This Miss Amos is our frame. This ribbon, its age, its wear, its stain, tells us when the message began, and that, in turn, tells us who could have sent it." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on the ribbon as if seeing it anew. Madame, however, did not flinch. "But not yet," Poirot said softly, returning the ribbon to the box. "First, I must give our sender the chance to speak freely. If they do not, then I will speak for them." He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "I ask only that you think, each of you, on what you would gain, or lose, by what rests in this box. When I return, I will expect an answer, without waiting for response." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to glance back at me. "Come, Hastings. There's still one place we must see before the night grows older." I followed him out into the dim corridor, the air cooler there, touched by the faint scent of rain that drifted in from an open window. As the door closed behind us, the muffled stillness of the room we had left seemed to press itself into my thoughts. "Poirot," I said, once we were alone, "you spoke as though you already knew exactly who placed those flowers. Do you?" He gave a small, knowing smile. Mais oui, mon ami. The question now is not who, but whether they will admit it before I must strip away the last of their pride. And this place we're going, what is it? An attic, he said simply. For in the attics of such houses, Hastings, one finds more than dust. One finds the past, untouched, unaltered, and waiting. We walked on, the sound of our footsteps echoing faintly along the corridor. Somewhere behind us, in that charged drawing room, I knew the thread was pulling tight. It would not be long before it snapped. Chapter 18, Roses of the Living. The attic of the Rockefeller estate was a long, sloping chamber beneath the roof, its air stale with the perfume of cedar and the faint, sweet raw paper left too long in the dark. Dust rose in motes as we climbed the narrow stairs, Poirot's polished shoes clicking on the boards with measured precision. He moved without hesitation to a row of old trunks stacked against the far wall. "Observe, Hastings," he said softly, kneeling before the largest and unlatching its tarnished clasp. "It is here that one finds a history that the drawing rooms will not speak of." Inside lay a neat arrangement of objects, folded linen, a scattering of yellowed letters tied with cord, and, nestled at the bottom, a bundle of silk ribbons, crimson once, now faded to a dull wine. Poirot lifted them out with care. The frayed edges, the subtle stains, identical to the one tied around the roses in the silver box. "You see, mon ami," he said, "this is not the ribbon of a florist. These are relics of another time, mementos of Madame Rockefeller's marriage, saved from bouquets given by her late husband. And here," he picked up a folded sheet from beneath the ribbons, a letter, unsent, dated nearly 20 years past. I watched as he read, his brows drawn together in concentration. Then he replaced it, his lips set in a thin line. "Come, Hastings. It is time to give our hostess back her property and her truth." We returned to the drawing room, where the same four sat as we had left them, though the air was tighter now, their expressions more guarded. Poirot placed a bundle of ribbons on the table beside the silver box. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we may now complete our frame. These ribbons belong to the late Monsieur Rockefeller, who gave them to his wife in the early years of their marriage. When he died, they remained with her until one by one they began to disappear." He looked toward Charlotte. "It was you, mademoiselle, who took them, not from malice toward madame, but from loyalty toward another, the man who placed the roses." Charlotte's composure wavered. I thought she knew. I thought she had guessed long ago." Poirot inclined his head gently. "She suspected, yes. But the truth, that was harder to face. The man who left the roses was not a stranger, nor an enemy. He was Dr. Marchand." A sharp intake of breath came from Madame Rockefeller. Marchand himself did not move, save for the tightening of his fingers on the armrest. Poirot continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "You, Doctor, were once close to Madame before her marriage. When she wed another, you withdrew, but your sentiment remained. After her husband's death, you saw your chance to remind her of what you had been to each other. The roses, tied with the ribbon she once treasured, were your message." Marchand's voice, when it came, was quiet. "She would not see me. I thought perhaps she would see the flowers. But Poirot said, you chose the grave as your stage. And in doing so, you forced her to share her grief with you, whether she wished it or not. Mademoiselle Charlotte sought to shield her from that intrusion, removing the flowers before she could see them. But when she arrived too late, the confrontation became inevitable. He opened the silver box and laid the roses upon the ribbons. The stain on the silk, it is not blood nor wine, but iodine. From your practice, Doctor, a trace left by your own hands." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Madame Rockefeller rose, her voice steady but low. "You presume too much, Henri. My grief was mine to carry, not yours to adorn." Marchand stood as well, inclining his head. "I see that now." He looked at Charlotte. "And you were kinder to me than I deserved." Poirot closed the box with a soft click. "The matter, I think, is ended. There has been no crime, save, perhaps, that of the heart. But let it be the last." Whitcomb gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. All this for a box of flowers. Only you, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. But it is never the object, monsieur. It is the hand that places it, and the reason why. That is where the truth always blooms. We took our leave shortly after. The air in the room still waited, but the tension loosened. Outside, the rain had begun again, soft and steady, pattering against the cobblestones as we walked toward the waiting car. I glanced back once at the tall windows of the Rochefort estate. A pale figure stood behind one curtain. Madame, perhaps, or Charlotte, watching us go. I wonder if the ribbons would be returned to their trunk in the attic, or if they would be burned, their history finally sealed. Poirot, however, was already settling into his seat, his mustache perfectly composed despite the damp air. "You see, Hastings," he said as the driver pulled away, "it is as I have always told you. In affairs of the heart, one must be delicate. But in affairs of pride, one must be exact. Only then can one cut the stem clean." And with that, he closed his eyes as if the case in the roses had been laid to rest for good,